And welcome everyone. Welcome to the Community Development and Transportation Committee for April 26, 2022. Certainly acknowledge our elected officials, Mayor Kurt Wilson, Council Member Christine Hall, Council Member Mike Palermo, Council Member Peter Vanstrom, Council Member Lee Hills, Council Member William Morthland. The purpose of committee meetings are for the city departments to convey information to the mayor and city council, discuss initiatives listed on the published agenda. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor, members of city council, and the city administrator. The ordinance does mandate the city administrator as chair of committee meetings. This is a public meeting, but not a public hearing. Therefore, while the meeting is open to the public, we do not take public comments or questions during committee meetings unless specifically authorized by the mayor and council. Public comments or questions are received at the regular city council meetings on the second and fourth Monday of each month at 7:00 p.m. in the city council chambers, and on the fifth Monday of forum. We do encourage and invite citizens to engage in our online platforms, and if you have any questions or need information regarding any matter, staff is available to provide that information to you. We certainly encourage the viewing audience to visit the city website for meetings, events, and departmental information. In addition, you will find information on the 100-day plan, as well as the recently adopted strategic plan. Also, if you have service requests or need to report a concern, please utilize the City of Roswell app or service web portal. I'd also like to acknowledge the Assistant City Attorney, Mr. Petty, here as well. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting for March 29th, 2022. I will entertain any motions for approval. Yes, Councilmember Palermo?
So I just have a point of clarification.
Yes.
And so just basically the way our city structure and process is set up is that a committee meeting can have nothing, no laws can be enacted, nothing really occurs at committee except to move things forward to city council for a vote. And hence, at city council is where there's the specifics around the quorum requirement, whereas there's no quorum within committee. So that's why theoretically, if this night goes long, it could end up being one elected official just motioning to move things forward to council without a quorum. And so that's why the city has never had an excused versus absent in historically. So I just want to kind of bring that up for staff, just to make sure there's consistency with the way that that committee, et cetera, used to be reported, and just knowing that it is different than city council meetings.
Yes, thank you, sir, for that clarification. With that, any motion for approval of the minutes? Yes, Councilmember Hall?
I would motion to approve with the corrections made to as Councilmember Palermo just.
With the identified clarifications?
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. And any second to that motion? Yes, second by Councilmember Palermo. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you very much. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Second item on the agenda is from Community Development. Consideration of transmittal of the annual update to the Capital Improvement Element, the CIE, and the Short-Term Work Program, STWP. And here is, to present that item, is Ms. Dybel.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to try to go through a bit of an explanation here, so just bear with me on this. So I want to explain, first of all, what the Capital Improvement Element and the Short-Term Work Program are. So both of these items are projects both of these items are components that are required in the comprehensive plan. So the CIE is a portion of the comp plan which sets out projected needs for system improvements during the planning horizon. It's a list of projects from the public safety, police and fire, from recreation and parks, and transportation. These projects that are on the list are considered eligible to use impact fees to help pay for a capital project. An impact fee is a fee that is charged as part of new development and is paid by developers and builders at the time of the building permit. And the impact fee is the proportionate share of the cost of a system improvement needed to serve new growth. So, for an example, a new subdivision is coming in or is being built, and new roads might be required. A new fire station could be required, or recreation facilities are being required based on that. So this is what is why we collect impact fees for new growth and development. So I'm going to go through all that, and I do have definitions of all these different items in here. The short-term work program is a list of projects and activities that are completed by staff. These projects and activities are done to implement the goals that are set forth in the comprehensive plan that's adopted. So both of these items are required components of the comp plan, and they're required by the state every year. It's an annual update that we do in order for us to be eligible, not only to collect impact fees, but it keeps our certified local government status. So I'm going to go through my PowerPoint here, and then I have a few other items I'll read through, and then we'll go for questions, okay? So, as I stated, both of the items are required components of the comprehensive plan. In 1990, the Georgia Department enacted the impact fee law, and that is for any local government that wanted to charge new developments for a portion of their capital facilities needed to serve it. So the impact fee, this is the definition that we have in the Unified Development Code: a payment of money imposed upon development activity as a condition of development, approval to pay for a proportionate share of the cost of system improvements needed to serve the new growth, which is what I just explained earlier to indicate what this actually is. So these, I took this out of the Department of Community Affairs, their impact fees and capital improvement planning. These are requirements for local governments that include CIEs. So this is why we do this every year. We have to update the CIE annually. And this includes an annual financial report that we get from the finance department for the year prior. So 2021 report would go down. We also have the CIE, which is the list of projects from the different departments, as I stated, from police and fire, rec and parks, and transportation. And then, of course, the short-term work program that is updated annually. And that comes from all departments across the city. And they're just the list of programs, or not programs, activities and projects that we do. Okay, so this allows us to maintain our certified local government status, which means it allows us to collect impact fees used by those departments for capital projects. The CLG allows us to also apply for grants. And we also are a Plan First city, so it helps us to maintain our Plan First status. And as pretty much this is kind of a little bit of the same. It's the project and programs ongoing by the city. It's prepared in compliance with the Department of Community Affairs. It's reviewed and approved by the ARC and DCA. And so adoption of this is done by October 31st of each year in order for us to stay in compliance. That's our date set by the state. So once the resolution for transmittal is sent to the state, you guys will approve the resolution for transmittal. The document will go down to the state and to ARC. They will review it. They might have questions, and sometimes it has come back in the past to say what to fix something or what does this mean. And we've had that a couple of times. Every time there's new staff down at the state, the new staff have different requirements. So over the last couple of years, we've seen a couple of comments and questions. Once they approve it, they send it back to us to say, we have approved this. It gets placed on an agenda for mayor and council, and you adopt it. The resolution for adoption is then sent back to the state with all the documents. Once they receive that, they send the mayor a letter indicating you have maintained your certified local government status for the next year. And then in the spring, or actually in February of next year, we will start all over again, and you will see another list. So to explain a little bit more about the list, Planning Commission did recommend approval of the transmittal, but there were a lot of questions. So this is basically, as we state, a wish list. These are just projects that are on the list. They are not projects that have been approved by the mayor and council. The council wants to approve a project and move it forward, they can do that at any time. The projects on the CIE list are only on there in order to indicate that they're impact fee eligible. So if you say, we want to take a project on this list and we want to elevate it and say, we want to fund this project and do it, if it's on the list, they can use impact fees. If it's not on the list, impact fees cannot be used. That's why items are on the list, and sometimes they stay on the list for years. And yes, a project can be removed from the list. That does happen. I did want to read one other item here regarding something that transportation has indicated. So, and as stated, just because something's on the list, it does not mean it's going to move forward. The mayor and council are the only ones who can move a project forward. Like I said, it just is on the list to indicate that it would be eligible for impact fees if you ever want to move a project forward. And I think that is it. Questions?
So two questions are, one question is, which you just actually, I think, finished up with. So I want to confirm that not a penny of impact fees can ever be spent without an official public approval from mayor and council. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then secondly, so since this comes to planning commission, which is a public meeting for public discussion and public comment, et cetera, has this typically gone to committee? I thought it went from planning commission to council typically.
In the past, I've always brought it to committee just to have them, just to see it beforehand. Sometimes it's a 5-minute item on an agenda. Sometimes it might be discussed for 20 minutes, or sometimes they might say, I want to understand what this project is, that's on the list. So with a new mayor and 3 new council members, kind of wanted to explain what this is that we do every year. Last year, it was included into the 2040 comprehensive plan, so it was just all packaged together. But when we don't have the 5 and 10-year update, we are required to send these 2 documents down to the state in order to keep the status.
Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, and thank you for that explanation. There is one item that is on the list that I would like to be removed, and that is an item, it's Sun Valley Road, House Road Connector Phase 3. Phase 2 and Phase 3 are on there, but
Is phase 3?
just Phase 3.
Which one is phase 3? Okay.
The cut through the neighborhood.
Okay, so phase 2 is the one that's the UPS.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Where is that, Christie?
what,
That's here. It's right,
which page number is it on
it's,
of the CIC?
Packet page 23.
Oh, 23?
sorry,
Mine's page-
No worries.
Sun
this is
Valley,
a cut through
phase
the
3.
neighborhoods.
Lord.
I mean, and it's just very,
Wanna keep this one.
Sun Valley Road, Howes Road Connector Phase 3,
right, Phase 3.
Ah, found it.
initiated on July of 2016. Is that what that is?
Jackie, is that
So
correct?
that's technically what it would have been put on there for July of 16 to start. And then, so as you can see, they're color coded. And the colors show that an item that's in red is to be deleted. It might be done, it might be coming off, or transportation has decided that they decided that this is not something that's gonna move forward at this time. Next year, it could come back on the list. You never know. The green means that it's changed or added. Sometimes things move. Sometimes money changes a little bit here or there, or they discern that, maybe you need this much for it, or maybe you need this much for it. So that's why there's colors. We change, now, before it goes to the state, everything becomes black and white. The colors are for the planning commission and the mayor and council's benefit to kind of see what's being changed and what's being added or deleted.
Questions? Yes, Mayor Wilson?
I guess you read my mind, didn't you, Randy? I guess really more for Christine and Michael. How much conversation did y'all have about prioritization of this reference outside of the 2040 comp plan? Did you have any discussion of this? Because this obviously, it's almost like an outlier.
I'd say I'd say that'd be a separate step. To directly answer your question, not much. That being said, I'd say that's a separate discussion than what this is here, because what this is here is just purely, we're telling the state, hey, here's all the things that we could possibly want to use in impact fees, because if it's not on this list, we're not going to be allowed to use impact fees. But then I'd see it as a separate discussion, working with staff on making it clear, here's what the priorities are. But then also another challenge is potentially you might end up having a development and a developer that where they have a lot of interest in having a large amount of impact fees going towards a certain project, in which case this council then has to decide if that's something they would support or not support. But that's why I see it as a different, first, today is really describing the universe.
Yep.
And then later on, I feel is a separate discussion of how should it be prioritized and,
Great
and
description.
what leeway do we even get?
It just is, you think about how much time we've spent together and how many things we have talked about. And we haven't spent a lot of time on this.
There's a good example, because last night, actually, I wrote this down on there and I forgot to set it. You mentioned you had the 100-day plan, and you asked Councilmember Northland to talk about the Rec and Parks part.
Yes.
So one of the items on there, of course, under the Recreation Parks portion,
Page 24?
is there items related to what they have listed as city-owned parks and properties listed just for development. So anything that they have, trails, the new building for A Sand, all that is covered under that one item. So that's where you see the tie-in for something that you want to move forward and something that Recreation and Parks has on the list.
What's funny, Jackie, it's a great point. Ryan's not here, I don't see. Ryan, you're not here, are you? Good, we'll talk bad about him. I don't remember those on some of the stuff that we've been talking about. We've had impact fees segregated a little bit, but not much in terms of some of the discussion. So, like ACE, for example, ACE 1, 2, and 3, I don't remember any impact fee being any part of that.
Well, you won't see that until you get to like the development stage, whereas the applicant might be able to use, like this, Rec and Parks might be able to use impact fees. And then what they'll end up doing is just talking to finance and saying, okay, how much do we have right now and how much do we want to use? So currently, they listed in the list here to use 100% for the project. Now, that doesn't mean they will use all 100%. They also have possible go bonds, a bond referendum, different items for possibly funding that. And that's what the other sources are listed as. But that doesn't mean they can't use some. So that's why they have it on the list. So if the project comes out, I have no idea how much it'll cost, but let's just say,
ACE 1, 2, and 3?
what are we looking at as a cost?
Call it 7.
7?
Yeah.
Okay,
Call
let's
it 8.
say, out of that 7, there's, 3 million in impact fees. I have no idea, I don't think there's that much, but let's say they can use $3 million in impact fees, and maybe they use it maybe the rest of the money comes from somewhere else, just depending. But yes, that's what it would be there for. That's why we have items on the list. So if, let's say, something is not on the list, and a grant comes from the federal government, say in December, but if it's not on the list, somebody could not use it until the next year. So you can elevate the project, you can start the project, but if it's not on the list, impact fees would not be able to be allowed. Now, but like I said, we do this every year, so you can always add something in the following year if that happens. That doesn't happen too often, but you never know. It could possibly happen. That's just trying to explain what this list is and what it really means.
Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
So a question I have, just knowing that I feel the bigger list of projects we have on here, the better, because it's just giving future mayor and council just that different, more opportunities, knowing that nothing would get passed and nothing would be spent without approval from mayor and council. Are sidewalks in general on here and or multi-use trails and or the bike ped master plan?
Trails are always on this list.
But that's where, but not just parks trails,
No,
but
not just
also.
parks. That's under transportation. They always have trails on here, and sidewalks, yes. That's always, I think that's a standard one that's just on here for years.
Councilmember Hall.
Just a clarification, so sidewalks are on here, I think, for 7 million, I'd have to find it again, roughly 7 million, and we have probably 40 or 50 million
probably.
dollars in needs for sidewalks, so is there a reason we don't put 40 or 50 million on?
That's a good question. You can ask transportation. I don't know if there's a reason why they just have 7 on here. But I know, I can say we probably don't have $40 million in impact fees.
Let's go ahead and put Dan on the spot. Dan's in the back corner. I see a few pieces, if you crabble them together, but Mr. Skowski,
I do not have a good explanation for why we don't ask for more sidewalk money.
Well, if it's on there, just so that.
it needs to be, how do we address that? So to Mike's point, that let's get the universe, this is the universe, right? Let's get the universe taken care of so we can help us make decisions and incorporate later. How do we get that done?
They can just change the money portion. This is just an estimate that's on there. It's not the whole amount. It's an estimate of what the project might cost. So if somebody says, they want to put it in for 10 million or 15 million, it can be put on there. We have one here, that's 49 million. We have different ones on here. That doesn't mean, and right now they indicate 20% for that item, of impact fees. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. We don't know. But yes, that can change and that number could be upped. That's easy.
So, Dan, can you do that?
Sure, 10's a nice round number.
And
We can.
in conjunction with that, the process would be for this to go to planning commission, correct?
Okay, so the item's already been to planning commission.
Oh, I'm
It
sorry.
went last week on April 19th. It is technically scheduled for the May 9th mayor and council meeting for a resolution for transmittal. So between now and then, we can make those changes to remove the item for Sun Valley Phase 3 and to put $10 million for sidewalks. I'll find that 15 million on sidewalks. I'll find that one, or I'll have someone from transportation make sure I have it on the right one. And then it'll come to you on the 9th. You will, if you choose to move it forward, it'll be a resolution for transmittal. And then once it's done, we will, like I said, we remove the colors. We send it down to the state in black and white with the ones that are on there that you transmit. We send down the short-term work program, the CIE, the impact fee fund statement, and a copy of the resolution. And then it gets reviewed, and then it comes back.
Okay, since Dan, thank you. Since Dan's standing up here, on page 22, it says Mansell Road Extension. Is that the extension that goes behind the Synovus and would cut back around to Highway 9? If it proposed behind the dance studio, is that it?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure that was in there. Thanks.
Yes, Mayor Wilson.
I just want to make sure that Joe is covered in here. I don't see Joe in here. I see Fire Station 8, and I see Fire Station 3 replaced, and I see replacement for 2. Does that cover everything, Randy, on his piece?
2, 3, and 8.
2, 3, and 8. I feel like something's missing.
That should cover it. The chief has looked at this.
I think that does.
Okay.
It does. What also may be helpful is we can obtain a report from finance on all impact fees collected at this point. In other words, a status report of all impact fees collected. I think that may be helpful as well.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Councilmember Morthland.
You were saying that the dollar amount on this can always go up, correct?
They can change. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. As you can see, there's different changes in here from some of the projects from transportation, some of the projects from Rec and Parks. Sometimes a project might go up a little bit, or they can go down depending.
What about the percentages?
Percentages can go up and down too, yes. You can say, we want to use 20% this year, but then next year they decided, we want to use 50%. And so they just have to show it on the list. So, and if it's on the list and they say they want to use 50% impact fees and we have that amount, then they can actually use that up to that amount. If they only have 50% and they want to use 75 or 80, they cannot.
Okay.
It has to be on the list and it has to be the percentage that you want. Now, you don't always put 100% for everything, because sometimes you want to be able to use different funds for different things.
So in this situation, on page 24, the Physical Activity Expansion Center, or Physical Activity Center Expansion Project is at 50%.
Correct.
Can we ask that we push that to 100?
Jeff is saying yes, I can make that change,
Okay.
100%.
Does that need to go to?
No.
Okay.
No. No.
Okay.
I can make that change, so when it comes to you on May 9th, you guys will see that in there. So you'll see the removal of Sun Valley Phase 3, 100% on the Physical Activity Center expansion, and then also the $15 million for the sidewalks. I think I had this, those are the three, and you had something else. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. Just a question. So in the example where you're going to go report that 100% of a project is going to be funded by impact fees, and say there are not sufficient impact fees to fund that, do you run into a problem?
So then at that point, if you don't have 100%, if you don't, let's use that one for an example, and it's listed as $1,300,000. I don't believe there's $1,300,000, if I'm right, because I have talked to finance about what's in the buckets, the impact fee money, and I don't believe there's that much money in there for Rec and Park at this point in time. So yes, then at that point, they say, okay, well, we'll use what we can, and we'll have to fund it from somewhere else. And that's why you kind of have some of the other fundings listed in here.
But it's not a problem with the state?
No, it's not a problem with the state. No.
Because perhaps we fund that with
Yes.
other source of funds, and it's going to be zero.
Correct.
So,
It's not a problem with the state, no.
Yes, Councilmember Hills.
Maybe part two of that question. So I'll use this particular item, the Physical Activity Center expansion, as an example. So if we move that up to 100%, or moving forward, you decide to use impact fees for that, and we do have the funds, the impact fees for that, but a grant comes in that same thing, are we committed to use the impact fees 100%? We have flexibility in there?
You have flexibility. You can use grant money, or you can use impact fees.
So why would we not ask all of these to be funded at 100% for a CYA?
Well, that's a good question. I might actually have to check with the state to see if there's some reason why not everybody puts that in there. But sometimes you know that you might have grants for different things, and you only want to put 10% down there because you might have other funding coming in. Like the T-SPLOS ones, obviously, T-SPLOS money, some of those projects, you don't need to have impact fees for 100% because you're going to get money from the federal government. So sometimes it's different things in that respect, or they kind of understand that there are grants out there and they know they can get some grants, or maybe there's some GO bonds that they know that are coming up and they have the money for those. So I don't know actually why over the years people just indicate this is the percentage we hope to use or maybe could possibly use, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion regarding this item? All right, seeing none, then we will ask for a motion to move this item forward to City Council as is required. Motion by Councilmember Hall.
yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Morthland. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you very much. That is approved, and we'll move forward to City Council. Item number 3 is a consideration of a text amendment to Articles 8 and 13, demolitions in historic district.
All right, so this is a proposed text amendment for demolition within the historic district. So this is in section 8.2 of the Unified Development Code, the first portion of this, which is where we establish criteria for the classification of the historic district properties. And this classification is used to determine whether demolition can be reviewed as an administrative certificate of appropriateness or must go to public HPC meeting as a major. So what this would do would end up changing that. So currently in Article 8.2.4, we have the Historic District Regulating Plan. So this plan was adopted as with the Historic District Master Plan, and in the code, these are the controls it sets. It sets the character areas, the primary street setbacks, the side street setbacks, and where there's a 40-foot wooded landscape strip is required along parts of State Route 9. If the regulating plan is not established a requirement for the location, the underlying zoning district regulations then do apply. And any amendments to this plan are subject to requirements for text amendments established in Article 13, as you will see also. So what we're looking at here is the new section in Article 8 to be separated into two. So what we just showed you, this is currently existing as it states in Article 8. This red would be what's proposed. So what we're looking at is to state the historic map was adopted by Mayor and Council on April 14th, 2003, classifies the land parcels into 5 categories: historic, historic obscured, non-historic, intrusion, and vacant. So what we're going to be doing is adding these definitions into Article 8 so that we can then further in Article 13 be able to do administrative demolitions, or it goes to the full board. Currently, all demos are required to go to the full HPC. They cannot be done by staff. So by adding this into Article 8 would then allow staff to be able to do some. And I'll explain here when we get to some background here, but I wanted to show you. So currently under the code, these are what we can do administratively in the historic district. We can review windows, roofs, storage sheds, doors, drainage, siding and trim. This is all we're allowed to do currently. So if somebody comes in the historic district and wants to change out some doors, we can do that via staff. If it's, painting or something like a brand new building, obviously it goes to the Historic Preservation Commission. What we're looking to add is the demolition of a building, structure, or objects classified as historic obscured or intrusion, which is shown on the map that we use currently in the office. So if you go back to what we had listed here, where we're adding these, intrusion as structures that from any year that detract from the historic character of the district, or non-historic, a building that's less than 50 years old in 2001 but contribute to the historic character of the district by possessing architectural character. So if it's determined on the map that it falls into one of those 2 categories and somebody wants to request a demolition, staff will review it, make sure they supplied all the application requirements, and then we would be able to approve it administratively instead of making them go to the board. So that's what we're adding here in this text amendment. A little caveat, and not to get you confused, but we did just put in our RFP to update the map, which is something we've been working on doing. It was approved a few years ago. We finally got it in there. So hopefully by next year, we'll have an updated map because we're a little bit behind. But we are working on that. So we should have a new historic properties map because technically 50 years, we are actually looking at from now compared to 2003. Do you have any questions for staff? Did I get that?
Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Knighton. I have a few questions and some comments. So from a comment standpoint, I strongly believe we're fortunate for having our historic district and having a HPC, a Historic Preservation Commission, that does ensure that historic buildings are not going to be torn down, and also making sure just that the character of our historic district is maintained with new developments that occur as well. So I think those are really good things that strengthen our community and our downtown and our quality of life. that being said, as we look at intrusion, structures from any year that detract from the historic character of the district, which are already defined, which the city has already been having these definitions and having this understanding, the fact that we slow down potential developments and different possibilities to actually have new developments that actually could look more historic than the intrusion property, that's something that is concerning, and I think an opportunity for us to be a little more business friendly and supportive of knowing that if it's an intrusive building, that's not something that we should be delaying with a much longer process. And since we already have it defined, it's already in a map, this is something that I certainly support with a couple clarifications. So one clarification: this has no effect at all with trees. All the tree protections within our code are still in there and unaffected by this. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. And then I guess my more detailed question is regarding historic obscured. So from an intrusion standpoint, it certainly makes sense to me. Help me understand historic obscured. I just want to make sure that we're not risking having any buildings that are contributing to our historic district. I don't want to risk those becoming easier to be torn down without HPC approval.
Okay, hey, this is Julie Martin, one of the planners. So historic obscured buildings on this definition do not contribute to the character of the historic district. So, and historic buildings obviously do. This is a sticky situation because sometimes what obscures it can be removed and repaired and the building restored to historic conditions. Sometimes the identifying elements or contributing elements are so far gone, there's no hope of restoring it. So that is a difficult question to answer. Are you throwing out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing if you throw in historic obscured along with intrusion?
And then, so, because I guess what I'd say is my initial reaction is absolutely, if it's one of the properties that falls into intrusion, then it should just be this minor request that you have set up here. If it's historic obscured, I wonder if that's where the adjustment should be potentially. Should it be as is? Should it be as staff recommends? Or should it just be something where the HPC needs to approve the demolition, but not require that the new plans have to be approved prior to them being allowed to demolish? I guess that's kind of my question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think
Totally makes
that,
sense.
yeah, we could work together to rephrase 13.7.11.g as proposed to include what you said.
Okay, I think that would certainly give me a lot more comfort there. That way, if it's something that's intrusion, then just right off the bat, that's just going straight to staff. They're getting what they need, and we're not slowing down the opportunity to really expand our walkable downtown. And then if it's something historic obscured, we're sounding a little more gray area. I still think there's a big improvement that should occur, which is right now, the delay is if it's historic obscured, where it might actually be for many different reasons not contributing to the historic character, and yet still a developer would have to wait for the HPC to approve all their new plans before they can even start demolition. Seems to me that we could still just improve it and have kind of an in-between that would still go to the HPC, but the HPC would not have the ability to, or requirement to weigh in on the plans, just weighing on, is it okay if they demolish it, yes or no? Knowing that any new plans would have to be approved by the HPC, and that's the thing I want to make clear. So even for the intrusion example, the landowner, the developer, whomever, they come to staff, they request to demolish an intrusive building. That does not just mean they can build whatever they want. It does not mean they can build another intrusive building. They're still going to have to go through the same process we have today. It's just we're removing one of the bottlenecks and just at least making it a more effective process. That's how I see it. What you have here.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. And Thank you, Mike. That's a really good point. I have a question on any of these. Is there an opportunity to fast track any of this for a developer to, if it doesn't fall under administrative variance, but maybe it should, could it be appealed to?
So if you're asking if a project comes in with a demolition, is there any way to fast track it?
Correct, to fast track it, so a sort of appeal to basically say, you know, this technically, under the way the code is written, needs to go through all these processes, but in reality is you have this dog property, but it just happens to fall into these other things. Is there a way to appeal that so that it's not weeks and weeks delayed? Does that make sense, that question?
Can I follow up on that, Randy?
Mayor Wilson.
I think to Christine's point, and I know we're just talking about inserting text into UDC H.2. That's really what the matter of hand is. But I think what Christine is spot on about asking, and it's so easy for us to forget, right?
So what we're checking, sorry, this is Lenore Bromberg, Deputy Director. So what you'd be asking to appeal is the map. So the map already defines every property in each of those categories that you see up there. So if they want to appeal their definition on that map, we'd have to have an appeal process for that, and I don't believe there currently is one. So if that's something that you're interested in, we'd have to take a look at it, that as maybe a separate text amendment, or come back to see how that would fit into this. Because this was specifically to talk about just the addition of the administrative for demo only for intrusion, and then whether or not we're going to include the historic obscured or not. So
Who's bringing this to committee?
this was requested by Councilman Palermo for staff to bring to committee.
Outstanding. Thank you, Michael. So, can I go back to the kind of the overarching point? Thank you, Michael, for bringing this. Makes perfect sense. Here's what we're after. Greater efficiency, greater response time, less bureaucracy, more better decision-making. And I think that at the end of the day, kind of to Christine's point, that's what we're after. And I think it's a fair assessment of us to say is that perhaps it's been a bit cumbersome. And I think sometimes the questions get technical, as they should, to get down to discernment. But the reality is we're too cumbersome in this arena. We're too cumbersome as a city in this arena. Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to protect the historic preservation of this great city. That's hugely important. But what has often happened is it's become a bureaucratic morass, whether it's on the HPC side or on the city side, and we trip all over ourselves, and then we make it very, very difficult to do what we ultimately want from both the government perspective and a resident perspective, which is to have good development in places that make sense. And we get it constrained, I think, too often, where we're not exactly achieving the objective that I think that the overwhelming majority of us want. Like, everybody's in support of preserving the great history of this city. But boy, does that get confusing sometimes based upon some of the narratives that we put out. And I think that Christine's question is, what, can I make it simpler? Can I make it faster? Can I make it more common sense? Like, what do I need to do that?
So may I ask a clarifying question, Christine? Are you asking about the entire process for historic design review or just the specific text amendment that we brought forward tonight? Because I think that may be a very different answer to your question of the complexity behind it.
I would say for both.
Okay.
And here we're talking about if Mike suggested taking the historic obscured out because that could lead to some different answers. But if we left historic obscured in, or actually if it's taken out, and if somebody wanted to have you administratively make a decision on historic obscured, could we fast track that for them?
So, may I? take a stab at trying to answer what I think you're trying to get at. So to answer Mayor Wilson's question about efficiency, I think Councilmember Palermo's approach is the best. Both historic obscured and intrusion are classified as non-contributing. Now, whether we can do that for historic buildings or the,
I don't think anybody's looking to do that for historic buildings.
non-historic,
Yeah.
I don't know how that would work with the state law. We have a state historic preservation act that governs a lot of the processes for local historic districts. So I don't know if that would work.
So, Ms. Ryan, I think actually, I think Councilmember Hall's concern is addressed with still with the update that we gave, and I just want to verify that. So basically, intrusion is going to be just a quick staff aspect. You verify that it's intrusive, all those different aspects, and they're getting what they need. Historic obscured, I'd expect they're coming in with the application, you're seeing it's historic obscured, based on the new language we discussed, you're seeing that, okay, this does not require the HPC to go through design or anything like that. It's just purely seeing, can this building be demolished? And so I would think that is fast tracking it to the next HPC meeting. And then the HPC, let's just say they turn it down. They say, no, you cannot destroy this building, or you can't do it until we see your plans or something like that. If that should even be, an option. Then I would think right off the bat, they then have the right to appeal to mayor and council because HPC denied them. And now they have the right to just immediately go to council, disagreeing with that outcome. Is that right?
Yes.
So I'd say that does fast track it compared to what it is today.
Let me ask you, Michael, and sorry, and please don't accept this in any shape, manner, or form as any kind of, even in the sphere of criticism. It's just some experience I've had. So this is just not anecdotal, but it's direct first and second experience. And I'd say relevant to Article 1374, with the administrative purview that you currently have, that sometimes it's not of any consequence. Like, I don't know that shutters, for example, or siding and trim are even getting to you to make an administrative review. I'm curious. Like, I know this is about just 8.2, but in reality, you have the appropriate authority under 1374 today, but I'm not so sure it's relevant, Michael. I'm not so sure that they even look at half the times. I think things are DOA too often in the city. They don't even get to administrative review.
Well, and so actually I think there's a real situation like that. And again, why I think it'd be really helpful for certainly mayor and council to meet with the different boards. We discussed what some residents experienced with the planning commission. And so another example I've recently heard from a business regarding the HPC is basically they had wanted to do more energy efficient windows, and basically they were told, nope, not allowed to, don't even ask. And it was never staff, nobody from City Hall ever said that.
Exactly.
Because I was surprised by it. I went down to staff, they explained to me, they're like, no, absolutely, it's right here.
What are you
They
talking about?
absolutely can
Exactly.
apply, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how we solve that, but I do think that's a challenge for us as a city, because I'm not so sure it's meeting the state guidelines, the state charter, of what we hope to accomplish for our city.
If I could go back really quick, because I'm a little confused about the changes that you were recommending regarding the historic obscured. So the definition of historic obscured, if I'm not mistaken, is that it has been modified so much that you cannot fix it. It's not irreparable, which means not fixable, which means that it's been changed so much that it's no longer contributing to the historic district's character, and we can't fix it.
Oh, so okay.
That's the way I'm reading that definition, and I wanted to make sure that Julie reads that
You put too much paint on the pig.
Yeah, this is Julie. The actual definition as it is on the 2003 historic properties map is buildings, structures, or objects that are more than 50 years old in 2001 but do not contribute to the historic character of the district due to unsympathetic but not irreparable alterations. So that goes back to what you were saying, that sometimes they can be reparable, and sometimes they cannot.
And that's why I still want to speed up the process and make it more efficient for them. But I think for that case, it seems reasonable for them very quickly to be on the next HPC meeting. And again, if there's an outcome that they disagree with, they always have the right to immediately come to the next mayor and council meeting, but still having HPC weigh in on that. But it's still a big change because today, they won't even weigh in on it until they've reviewed all the future plans and gone through all that future design and all those different meetings, where I think this is taking it from being 10 meetings to being 1 meeting. And that's I think, a big efficiency improvement.
All right, thank you. Any further questions?
So if there's no further questions, I'd love to make a motion to bring this to council
All right.
with the changes that we just discussed. So basically, everything on here would be as written regarding intrusion, but the historic obscured would still have an updated, improved process, which would be just going to HPC for their demolition approval without requiring the design process.
All right, thank you. Motion by Councilmember Palermo. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Hall. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All right, thank you very much. Passes unanimously. Next item, item number 4, is a consideration of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, Section 13.4.3, who can submit an application, paragraph E, regarding multifamily conditional use.
All right, so our last item on the agenda, this is related to recent updates to the Unified Development Code regarding the multifamily that we've been going through. We've been adding the definitions for the apartment and condominium. This was heard by the Planning Commission last week. It'll be coming to you for first reading in May. And then the use tables, which has been initiated regarding the multifamily apartment and condominium, is on the Planning Commission agenda in May, and you will see that one for a first reading in June. So currently, 13.4.3 in the code states, multifamily shall be allowed as a conditional use in the following locations in the city of Roswell. Number 1, on a parcel of property which borders Georgia State Highway 9 or Georgia 140 east of Highway 9 or Highway 92. And number 2, on property where a multifamily development exists today or has an approved plan as of January 1st, 2020. If neither of the above locations apply, multifamily would be allowed as a conditional use within the historic district at no more than 8 units per acre, or outside the historic district as a conditional use within a mixed-use development where the square footage on non-residential uses are greater than 75%. This is in the code today. This is the new proposed language to be added to section 13.4.3 related to multifamily. If the proposed mixed-use development includes multiple parcels, a subdivision review in accordance with section 13.5 is required to be completed prior to submission of the conditional use request. If the proposed mixed-use development includes existing buildings, uses, or infrastructure that are required to meet the square footage of the non-residential uses, then those existing buildings, uses, or infrastructure must comply with all other applicable sections of the UDC, and the conditional use request must include all applicable conditional use requests or concurrent variances as required by the current Unified Development Code. So what that means is if there's a project that's going to come forward and say there are 3 parcels with some existing buildings on a couple of the parcels, and they want to bring a multifamily mixed-use development forward to the mayor and council, the first thing they would have to do under the subdivision review in section 13.5, which is a plat. So they would have to do a combination plat to bring all those parcels into one, am I right on that? Or preliminary, final, a plat of some kind, combination or preliminary and final, to staff. We'd have to review it, make sure, and then it brings it into one parcel of record. That's the step 1. And then if there are existing buildings on the parcels, and they want to use the square footage of those existing buildings, so let's say there's 2 two commercial buildings that are existing on the property, but they're vacant, okay? But they're zoned commercial and they've been used commercial. And they're gonna say, well, we want, or they're not vacant, well, sorry, they're not vacant. And they wanna use those buildings as part of the square footage in order to meet that 75%, or depending on the zoning, it could be 51%, for the development. So they would have to bring all of those items up to what we have to comply in the code today. So if there's outdoor amenity space that hasn't been used, that would have to be required. If there's new parking standards, that would have to be added. If the buildings don't meet setbacks or don't meet the build-to zone, they would need variances, most likely if they wanted to leave the buildings there and not meet the build-to zone requirement. So that's what they're saying at the bottom part here, that if all applicable conditional use requests would have to, and the concurrent variances would have to be added as part of their application. So let's just use a couple of buildings that are existing and they're 25 feet, 35 feet back from the road, but the build-to zone requires you to be between 0 and 10, okay? Well, they're obviously not going to meet that. So they either demolish the building and show a new plan in order to, on the drawings, to meet that. But if they don't want to do that, because demolishing the building would then, of course, cause them to pay more to rebuild and current standards and maybe materials and everything else, then they would need to ask for concurrent variances in order to meet the requirements of today's code. Because some of those buildings could have been built in the 1980s, the 1990s, or the early 2000s, and codes, as you know, change. We've had new sidewalk rules. We've had new stormwater standards. Some of the stormwater standards from the 80s and the 90s, they might not exist. So the person would have to comply with all the new items, would have to bring everything forward. And that's what this language is looking to do. So there'd be a couple of steps. They'd have to do a plat, put everything together so it's on one parcel of record, and all existing buildings, if they choose to use this building square footage as part of their mixed-use development, would have to be brought up to code and meet and comply with everything that we have in the current Unified Development Code, or request a variance as they go through the process with the mayor and council. Does that make sense? I tried to explain that to the best of my ability.
Yes,
I know it's confusing.
Councilmember Palermo.
I think really well done. So I think you did a great job here of as you pointed out, really what it's really doing is taking away the potential for loopholes and ensuring that the intent of our code and our goals for mixed use are going to be met. So I think it's great. So infrastructure, is that what makes it so that sidewalks have to be up? So for example, if it's in a place where it requires a 10-foot multi-use trail and a 6-foot grass strip, then basically that would be considered infrastructure?
Infrastructure, mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So I think this looks fantastic. I think you did a really good job with this. The caveat is I believe you need to copy and paste it to an additional part though. I think it needs to be here under section 13.4.3 because that's that fourth fourth possibility of where multifamily could go. But the other place I believe it needs to go is under CX.
So you want it in Article 4 as well, under the
Yes.
CX section, which would be right here. Let me find it real quick. So I make sure I have the right part that you're talking about.
You should.
So here, under the CX is, under 4.2.1, the applicability section, which is where we have the CX part, where we talk about the 51%.
Right, exactly, because just as you've added it here for the 75%, it should also be added in the place where we have the 51%, or else someone could have that same loophole that you've identified.
I think it's pretty good.
We can certainly do that, but just a point of clarification, that regardless of whether you're doing CX in the 51% or you're coming here, this still applies. Because this is for your conditional use request for multifamily. So this is tied to CX, whether it's 51%, whether you are CX and there's no percent, or you're in 75%. So it doesn't, just so you know, this applies if you're coming in for a mixed-use development asking for multifamily. period, end of story.
Excellent.
That's why we put it where we did.
So I do like it that you have it safe, and I think absolutely it should be here. For me, wanting to make sure it's always just as completely clear for developers as possible and residents, there's no confusion. I'd feel more comfortable knowing that it only has to be here. I'd prefer if we also had it in that section, just so they don't just read that part without reading this detailed part.
Yeah, we'd have to do that, yeah, you're right. So yes, and it's in Article 13 mainly because of its administration section, but
Right.
yes. We can add it to 4.2.1.
It's great. Well done. I know that's not to close loopholes, not an easy task. So definitely appreciate you being so active. And I think you
You
did
can
it
thank
great here.
Lenore, she wrote this one.
Yeah.
This is hers.
Well done.
Any further questions, comments from mayor and council?
With that
Yes.
motion with the update to add an additional location and to move this to the next mayor and council meeting.
All right, thank you. Motion by Councilmember Palermo, second by Councilmember Hall. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All right, thank you very much. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Don't go far, Jackie.
Okay.
I'm joking.
Oh, okay.
All right.
All right, Dan, I'm hurrying.
Next up, we have transportation. Item number 5, consideration of the formation and bylaws of the Citizens Transportation Commission. Mr. Skalski.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. No, actually, my intent is. So, good evening, Mayor and Council. I didn't plan on walking through this in, do we need a minute? Or? Sorry. No. So the first item is the consideration of the Citizens Transportation Commission. And in your package is a copy of a draft outline for its organization. I'll be happy to walk through that briefly. I didn't plan on scrolling through the entire thing on the screen, but I'll be happy to just hit some highlights for you. And if you'd like to jump right in with some questions and answers, we can do that. But the important thing that I'd like to begin with is this is part of the mayor's 100-day action plan. It's also an item that's a specific objective in the strategic plan that was just approved. And I did have one clarification just about the terms. I think they're a little inconsistent between the item description and the actual policies it's drafted, which is around 2-year terms. But in general, this is to help provide some guidance for all of the transportation activities in the city. It's consistent in its goals and objectives with the strategic plan, as well as some other refinements that I think were suggested as part of the drafting process. Those are listed under objectives. The bulk of this document talks about the role and responsibilities of the commission. Just consensus, desirable, majority vote required to move things forward to mayor and council. The authority to create subcommittees, but not necessarily engage or assign outside individuals to be participating as sort of part-time folks in the commission. Compliance with the Georgia Open Meetings and Open Records Act. The role of personnel from the staff of the city in supporting the commission and limitations on that. Reporting directly to the mayor and council. The use of meetings, meeting rooms at City Hall, and some basic logistics in terms of notice if city staff are requested to participate, and a request or an inclusion of an orientation session to kind of provide a foundational level of background information on transportation operations, the department, as well as applicable laws and regulations and current priorities in our transportation master plan. And then the last point was really about appointments and terms, and that was 7-member commission with the mayor appointing the chairperson and all members, each member of mayor and council nominating 1 member, and all of them serving 2-year terms. So that's kind of a nutshell summary of what's proposed, and I'll be happy to address any questions or just listen to y'all's discussion about whether this is what you had in mind in terms of the commission structure.
Yes, Councilmember Palermo?
So I guess just a question I have for this, for both Mr. Skalsky, I'd love your input, but also for this mayor and council, is should we do 2-year terms where all 2-year terms begin and end at the same time? Or should we do staggered where when it's determined in closure, just like we do for every other committee position or every board position, should it be determined where there's some 1-year positions and some 2-year positions? And that's, I don't have a strong preference either way, but I just bring up that question for Mr. Skalsky and for the mayor and council.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Hall?
Thank you. To weigh in on that, I think if we could stagger them, have some folks start with 1-year terms and start with 2-year terms might make sense. My question is, are these folks required to be residents of Roswell or have a business in Roswell, or what is the, sorry, I need to glance for that.
Roswell residence is required in the first sentence
Okay.
of the introduction. Select group of 7 Roswell residents.
Thank you.
Sorry, should have mentioned that.
All right. Yes, Mayor Wilson?
I'll try not to monopolize the rest of the evening. For those of you who have somewhere to go, you might want to leave now. It's going to take a while. No, I'm joking. Orientation, I would like to suggest to the council that this is probably the most important part of the entire Transportation Commission. And I'm going to segue is, this is something that the council has discussed that we really need to do with all of our boards and commissions. Is that really this council should have an orientation with all of its boards, and it should start off with, obviously, initial orientation, and what is the vision of that particular commission. So the very first thing here, Dan, for me and council, I would say is our overview, purpose, da-da-da-da-da. And you say public transportation laws, Roswell transportation plan. The first thing, it's the vision of the mayor and council. I.e., because you're creating initiating the Transportation Commission. So, got to start with what's the vision? That would be my first piece on orientation. And as just a backdraft to that, I'd say to my council colleagues and to you too, Mr. Chairman, that we cannot initiate this process with our boards and commissions soon enough in 2022 so that we have the same kind of alignment in terms of overall overarching strategy and vision for the city. A couple of just small pieces. I struck number 4 on commission roles and responsibilities. I saw it as problematic for this commission to create subcommittees. I'm not saying that that is a DOA factor for me. It just looks problematic. On number 5, underneath commission roles and responsibilities, I understand why we wrote that like it was, and I apologize for Dan for not suggesting this to you and Michael earlier. I think we got to be very specific about the commission meets monthly or at other such intervals. I think you got to be very specific. The commission is going to meet once a month and or, right? So I think we have to tell the commission this is a monthly meeting, first Monday or first Tuesday or what have you. Go ahead and set up that schedule. Agree with Christine 110%. Start off with some 1-year and some 2-year, and that the terms should be 2-year terms. And y'all educate me, aren't most of the terms for most of boards and commissions, with the exception of the RHA, aren't they 2-year terms? 3-year terms? Yeah, 4. So I don't know what y'all's philosophical bent on it. Mine is 2, exactly, Peter. I think 2 years is a heavy investment for any resident. And, 4 years, I think it's kind of like, well, look at Mike. I mean, he's been here 6 years and then he's done. I mean, mentally, emotionally, physically, yeah, woo. So I would suggest, I kind of like Christine's suggestion of 1 year and 2 year terms to get this thing started. And then maybe clarity, because I don't know how it looks on the other boards and commissions, because I get the emails from BRZ and HBC and yada yada and everybody, you know, and they go through the various people on staff, but I usually don't see them from the liaisons. And I'm wondering if there shouldn't be a liaison piece to the boards and commissions so that the liaison is being immediately communicated to, and or I think what we all hope for is that the liaison is at the commission meeting from time to time, if not all the time, or the board and commission meeting, because I think that's a big deal. Obviously not a requirement for the liaison, but I think something we've all talked about that we'd like to see happen more. So just kind of an overview, orientation has got to begin with the commission vision from the mayor and council. Number 4, from my perspective, I probably would strike number 4, but obviously that's up to my colleagues. Number 5, I would be very specific with a meeting once a month and what that specific meeting time was. And then on commission appointments and terms, I probably would add some language about the liaison, and I would also be very specific about the 1 and 2 year terms that Christine mentioned, but an ongoing 2 year term cycle, I think, for the commission. Those are my thoughts.
Yes, Councilmember Vanstrom.
I'd just like to share on item number 4, Mayor. When I was on Planning Commission, we broke into some very productive subcommittee work where within the committee itself broke down, reported back to the whole committee. It was, and I know you love to expedite things. It was very helpful in getting items moved forward in some way sometimes, and I found it to be very beneficial. Because what it is in here is that it's not to include additional citizens or persons outside of the committee itself, and I think that's what you're trying to make sure doesn't happen.
Exactly. Thank you, Pete. That's a great distinction.
Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Just a quick question on the appointments and terms. Are there reappointments, or is that addressed, how many terms they can be reappointed for?
It is currently silent on reappointments, so that's something that is totally at your discretion.
Because the existing commissions have reappointment rules. I would just suggest whatever, that we adopt something.
Councilmember Palermo.
So I think great feedback and great discussion. So I'd actually like to make some proposals for a motion. Obviously, would encourage and love more discussion. But what I was hearing from Councilman Vanstrom and Mayor Wilson, I think there's a potential compromise on here where what if instead of striking number 4, we just actually deleted the last sentence, which was the commission may request external persons. At the end of the day, they can always request anything they want to the mayor and council. I don't think we need to add that sentence, but then still just knowing they can create their little subcommittees, just as Councilman Vanstrom saw as effective in Planning Commission. Is that
Perfect. Perfect.
So I'll plan on making a motion which will include for number 4, we strike the final sentence, which begins with the commission may. For section 5, we adjust from where it says monthly, let's see, where is that? Monthly or at, instead it's monthly and or that. Does that meet your preference, Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that would be in my motion where we'd update that. The section, Mr. Skalsky, I believe you understood, and we can get together prior to this coming to the.
I'd like to go ahead and put a day in a week.
So I guess my only concern there is where I don't want to come up with it today, because I'd want to make sure staff weighed in on what night is available with the different commissions and all that.
And I would just defer to whoever the commission members on settling on the most convenient potential time for the participants.
Perhaps, but I agree with.
I would not.
Okay.
Because that's a precedent that if you try to arrange it around the commission members, you know, it's one of those things where You got to set a date and time, and people got to make it work.
Would you be comfortable with for now? We could always, of course, update this next week at the council meeting, but now we say monthly on the same date, something to show it's not just willy-nilly. It's going to be, here's the date each month. We don't know which day it's going to be, but whichever one it is, it's going to be the same one every month.
Meets on the same date.
Yep, meets on the same day monthly.
Regularly scheduled date as
Yeah.
assigned by.
So we'll have staff go with that. And then we'll do, yeah, in my motion, I'll request that staff updates the terms so that it's staggered. And so, Mr. Scalzi, we can get together prior there for how we'll update that for the next council meeting. I just propose, for these 2-year terms, and some of them even being, the first one's being 1, how would it be? I believe our other commissions have three-term limit, 3 terms as well, so should we just say 3 consecutive term limit?
I'd be okay with that.
Okay, so,
Total of 6 years?
that's right.
How about 3 terms and/or a total of 6 years? Because these people that get started, the first 1-year term, you may want some of them to serve.
Yeah. So yeah, 3, actually you could do, because I think actually the language is complete term, so let's just use the language that we have in other commissions, if that works. And were there-
Councilmember Hills?
I don't know if we have this going on right now, but with that 1-year term, I don't know if we could have the appointees make a decision within who takes the one, but not let that count as a
Right,
term.
yeah. So we could, I definitely agree with that. I think we all agree on the concept, let's have staff do that, but I completely 100% agree. Yeah. Right. So, and the expectation is staff would update based on this intent, and then, of course, at the mayor and council meeting, we can, of course, make sure it meets that.
Councilmember Vanstrom? Do you have a
Well,
comment?
I think I'll defer until
Okay.
Councilmember Palermo's finished with what he's doing and all that.
That's all the ones I had, so I just want to make sure we're capturing every possible.
When you get through, I've got a question. But Peter, go ahead, sir.
Mayor, you were mentioning including the vision in the orientation.
Yes, sir.
Would that just simply be adding a number 6, which would be the strategic plan? Just being orientation of this.
I think,
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
real quick, and you may want to include it both places, but I believe on the first page or second page, I can't remember, the actual, it mentions under goal,
yes, sir.
under that first paragraph, or second paragraph there, and it goes on to explain that the mission of the Transportation Committee would be aligned with the city's strategic plan, and it goes into some depth on ensuring that happens with respect to the overarching strategic plan, the goals of that transportation section, et cetera.
I'm going to be a little semantical. I'd say rather than saying goal, to your point, Commissioner, Chairman, sorry about the step down there. Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that should be a mission rather than goal,
Okay.
which is really what we're after, right? The vision or the mission. We talked about, we've done a lot through this exercise. Goal is it's a very powerful word in circumstances. I think in this particular case, it is not as relevant. It is the mission.
Okay. All right. Yes. Dan, yes, please.
Could I just make a comment on that orientation session? I would just suggest maybe that be number 1 on the list of mayor and council vision, and everything else jump down a number, just so that it's reviewed as a starting point.
To your point, Dan, I think that our hope is that 20 years from now, with the Transportation Commission, right, it's following this mission, and there's clarity from the city government, from the mayor and city council and staff, and the people serving on the Transportation Commission, like, we understand what the mission is, and there's alignment about that. And I think we can improve upon that. We've talked about that with some of our boards and commissions as well, is creating clear missions and strategy and focus being in alignment with the mayor and council's strategy and perspective. So yes, thank you. I've got a question for y'all. We have talked a lot about boards and commissions, but we haven't talked a lot about boards and commissions. And we talked, and since I'm the bad guy, and I don't mind being the bad guy. When I talked about it and started designing some of the pieces, what I thought for how to design committees, how to design the appointment of the committees. Part of that was looking at some of where I thought committees worked and sometimes where they worked better than other situations. And I'm asking you guys. One of the things that always seemed very political to me was when we always left the mayor as the chairperson of the city or whatever have you, gets appointment power that has to be confirmed by the council, right? So kind of got those two separate pieces where you got the mayor, kind of the executive branch, if you will. It's a little different in the city. And then you got the council that's kind of as the representative branch. And the representative branch has more power than the executive branch. But there are certain roles that the executive branch gets to have, which is appointment power that has to be confirmed by the representative branch. And so I ask that because sometimes it's looked to me in the past, and look, it gets abused both ways, let's be frank. But sometimes where the process got very political, where every individual council person had a choice. And I know we worked very well together. But I'm wondering over the long term, is that the best methodology for selecting ongoing people? You still got to confirm them. But should the appointments come from the mayor? Or should they come from everybody, the mayor and the council, all have an individual selection of picking 4 commissions? I'm just asking. This is a broad philosophical question, but it's a worthy time of asking it. And obviously one day in the future, 5 years from now, when I'm no longer here, you guys will have a charter conversation. You can talk about this, and you'll be talking about it in depth in the charter. But it is a worthy conversation. And since we're starting a new commission, what are your thoughts on the best way to handle that?
Councilmember Hall?
I think we need a work session just devoted to this topic.
All right. Councilmember Morthland, you have a? Okay.
So the question at point here is, in the future, 20 years down the road, you're most interested in seeing what's going to be the biggest voice for the Roswell residents based off of whether it be all mayor appointee or one by one council person. And my answer,
Exactly. What's the best way ongoing from an efficacy perspective
if you want the
to appoint and have the best representation on ongoing representation on the councils, of the boards and commissions that's effective?
My recommendation, if you want to cast the biggest net, would be for each council person to have a appointee, would be my feedback.
I think the residents will overwhelmingly agree with you, Will, so I think that is the correct answer. I don't know if it's the correct answer. And that's why I'm raising the question. It's like, look, I'm happy to have people hate me on this. I'm always looking at what's the best utilization to bring on an ongoing structure that's going to work the best in the long term. And I have just seen sometimes where it looked to me like it got awfully political when sometimes council members were making choices and going, was that the best thing for that particular board or commission, or was that a political choice? And sometimes when it's relegated, don't get me wrong, same thing with a mayor. Mayor can do the same thing, get awfully political. That's so. Your process of the democratic answer is, I think, the answer that the overwhelming majority of residents will agree with. And I'm just dumb enough to ask the question publicly because I think it's a worthy question. But it's set up here that each council member will have a committee member to appoint.
Yes, Councilmember Hall?
Randy, would you review for us how the other commissions work and how this one's going to be different, the way it's structuring, just for general education for everybody?
I think this was modeled after another commission that we had on another related transportation item. Mr. Skowski would like to elaborate.
I believe that's correct, although I will admit that I am not the city's expert on boards and commissions, since this will be my first direct one. I was aware of the Historic Gateway Citizens Advisory Committee, and that, I believe, provided some background. However, I think this is, I would say, cut from relatively fresh cloth in terms of input to the city.
And I think some of the boards and commissions obviously have been established many years ago, and they serve different functions. You know, your Historic Preservation Board, your Planning Commission, you know, these other committees and commissions serve different purposes, so I don't know if one size fits all specifically.
That's a good point. To your point, though, Mr. Chairman, I mean, you think about it, like, the worst appointment piece is where the mayor, we have a board, I know the public doesn't probably know this. There is a board where the mayor has a unilateral appointment power with no check-in from the council. I think that's a poor solution. Like, that is absolutely wrought with, there's no check and balance, where the people as represented by the council have no way in on the measure. We actually have a board in this city where that occurs, where the mayor has unilateral appointment power. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that, not by any stretch. I'm always suggesting that the veto power on any appointment lies with the people vis-a-vis the city council. That the council is representative of the people, and that the people have the final say, and always should have the final say, in a veto power. I'm just asking the question sometimes from an efficacy perspective, does it make sense sometimes for the mayor to make the appointments? You still could kill the appointment, right? You can still say, no, not gonna happen. But I'm just curious sometimes from an administrative, ongoing efficacy perspective, does it make better sense? But, hey, we're all part-timers. I know you're working about 10 hours a week. I'm working about 4 hours a week. I mean, so, we got a good lot of time. But good point, and I will, just raising the point, but because in here it's clearly written that you're gonna have an appointment, you're gonna have an appointment. You know, Will, Lee, Peter, Michael, and Christine gets two. It doesn't say that here, but we all know Christine gets two picks.
Because I wrote the first one.
That's right, you wrote the first one.
If it is helpful, certainly staff can put together some type of matrix or other outline of all of the various boards and commissions, how they're appointed, who appoints them, their terms, et cetera, so you can have that all consolidated. Perhaps that would be helpful.
And it would be because there's a lot of misunderstandings about boards and commissions. I think we've all come across that in our city. And that the boards and commissions have too, part of this, I think why the overview is so important, is that this board, this commission has a unique responsibility to its fellow residents, but also to its mayor and council. That it is an advisory piece, and we didn't put that in here, but it has an advisory role that's very important. But it's an advisory role, you know, and that's an important distinction that probably has not been well adhered to in the past in this city.
Yes, Councilmember Morthland.
On Councilman Palermo's verbiage that he provided, I just want to make sure I'm understanding on the, for better lack of words, term limits that we're talking here. We got a 1 year and we got a 2 year term. And the 1 year is considered to be a full term if you're serving the 1 year appointment back-to-back consecutive. Is that correct?
We can just say upon 6 consecutive years.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That works.
You get 6 years, right, Mike?
That makes it
I think
very
so.
simple to
You get
understand,
6
yeah.
years. Like Mike. Mike's got 6 years.
And so that's a motion unless there's any other additions or edits anyone would like to make.
I'm ready to second it.
All right, motion by Councilmember Palermo, and second by Councilmember Hall. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And let me, point of clarification, this item will move forward
Actually, let me amend my motion with,
Yes.
that, to make it clear, I am motioning to move this forward to the special called meeting next week.
Yes.
Hopefully, there's still support for it.
Thank you very much. That's another second. Everybody in favor of moving it to that May 2nd meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Just want to make sure that was clarified. All right. Thank you very much. Next item is transportation and Mr. Skalski. Consideration for the mayor and/or city administrator to sign a contract with Atkins for transportation special purpose local option sales tax, known as T-Splost, program management services in the amount of $1 million. Mr. Skalski.
Thank you, Mr. Knighton. So this item is the recommendation to award a contract to a program management firm to assist us during the T-Splost 2 implementation and oversight. I think this has probably a number of major reasons for moving forward with it. We had a program manager on T-Splost 1. We found it helpful. T-Splost 2 has 16 projects and an estimated $73 million in the Tier 1 category. Having a program manager will allow us to have a significant depth of resources, capacity, and the ability to move forward on multiple fronts quickly. And I believe that's one message that we've heard loud and clear, is that we'd like to see some progress on T-Splost 2 quickly. We did issue a request for proposal. The scope and the outline of the potential services are included in your package. I did not plan on going over that in great detail, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. And this is a 5-year contract. We had one proponent who submitted. We had 11 interested parties at the pre-qual. We're satisfied and critically reviewed their qualifications and thought they were very well qualified for the assignment. And this would be for year 1 of that, to get us out of the gate quickly and get our program set up and moving for the citizens of Roswell. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilmember Hall.
And just to follow up and clarify, this is what we discussed during our budget meetings last week. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. Although I'd certainly love to advocate for us doing it in-house, at the end of the day, we do not have the resources to go as fast as I believe our residents want to in really making progress and improving transportation, improving pedestrian safety, activity, et cetera. And if anything, I think that was certainly feedback we got on T-Splost 1 of just really wanting to see more results. I believe we should move forward with this and make sure that we are improving the quality of life for residents as fast as we can, and this is the way to, I think, best do it.
Thank you. Any further? Yes, Mayor Wilson.
Yeah, Mike, kind of following up on that comment, I think one of the things that's important to note is that we are spending $1 million of our residents' money for this. And the reason we're doing that, forgive me, the reason that we are making that decision is for, one, we believe that it will make us more efficient, it'll bring greater results, and potentially it will bring greater utilization of the T-Splost money, which means it's an investment to get a greater use of the actual T-Splost funds. Sounds a little complicated, but at the end of the day, we're making a financial consideration. We are spending money to get better results, faster results, to get a greater scope of use of the T-Splost money that was approved by the voters. So we think by doing this, that it's going to deem 3 different things for our residents. And one is, which really doesn't show up here, is that it would be a financial gain, even though we're spending money.
Could not agree more.
Yes, Councilmember Vanstrom.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to what the mayor said for those who are listening and not seeing all this material, that's for a $97 million proposal of T-Splost funds. I think an investment to better organize the use of that incredible number is a wise decision.
On that note, motion to move forward.
All right, motion by Councilmember Palermo, second by Councilmember Hills. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you very much. Passes unanimously. Yes.
Could I request that we go out of order and do item 8 and item 7, if that's okay? Only because Greg is sitting here and he's going to present item 8.
All right, any objection from the committee on moving those items in reverse order? Okay, thank you very much. So we'll discuss item 8, which is a discussion of the Old Alabama Multi-Use Trail Project.
So this project is the Old Alabama Multi-Use Trail Project. This is a guidance item. We are looking for some guidance from Mayor and Council on the, particularly with the typical section along the Big Creek Park frontage. The project starts, so the project is highlighted here in the red line along Old Alabama. The project starts at the Big Creek Park entrance. It's right here on the left side of the map, and it follows along the north side of Old Alabama up to the traffic signal at Wooden Road. So as you'll see in your packet, we have identified 3 options for the typical section along the Big Creek Park frontage. And with these 3 options, we are showing the different potential tree impacts that each option would have and the potential cost. These are basically, like for option 1, we're showing most impact to trees with the least amount of cost. Option 2 would have the least impact of trees with the highest cost. And option 3 would have, it kind of falls about in the middle. So option 1, so the typical section right now that we currently have, we have existing curb and gutter, and we're showing a 5-foot grass strip with a 10-foot multi-use trail. And then we're just showing right now just a normal 4-to-1 slope going behind the sidewalk. Option 2 is a footing wall that would be up to 8 feet high, and it is approximately $550,000. For about we'd have to have about 600 feet of this retaining wall along the Big Creek Park frontage. The total frontage of the park is about 1,200 feet, so this wall would be basically half of the entire frontage of the Big Creek Park. And then option 2 is something that we came up with our consultant along with Recreation and Park staff. This is kind of a combination of 1 and 2, but we were able to use a smaller gravity type wall, which would only be about 2 to 4 feet in height and is about $70,000. And that is staff's recommendation, but we are looking for some guidance from Mayor and Council. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Oh,
Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
thank you for the presentation, and thank you for in your drawings, including both the tree impact and definitely the cost impact. And with that, I'd say certainly option 2 is off the table from my standpoint when you mentioned that cost. My initial reaction is wanting to go towards staff's recommendation of option 3. I want to kind of raise the question for staff, and no need to answer it tonight, but more of just a thought. What I wonder is, certainly, I prefer a 10-foot sidewalk and a 5-foot grass strip, but I do wonder, 3-foot grass strip, 4 feet, 2 feet, kind of curious as I think about what that impact is when there's large savings, at hand. So not that we need to address it here, but just something I bring up as we're hopefully going to be building a lot of multi-use trails all over the city.
Could we just?
Yes, please.
Thank you for that question, just because had you not asked it, we probably would have asked you the same question before the session was done, just because that little bit of flexibility does provide a lot of, just call it wiggle room to deal with localized constraints or just issues that we may run into during detailed design. So thank you.
Can you Dan, restate your understanding of that for my clarity, sorry.
If,
for my guest.
I think the way I understood it was, is there flexibility, or would it make sense to consider some flexibility in the width of the grass strip or the width of the trail itself when we get into the details? And I think that's the way I understood the question. Is that fair?
It is my question. I certainly want to hear from mayor and council. The one thing I want to stress is I believe there is absolutely never any flexibility for staff to go below 8 feet when it's a multi-use trail, because then, of course, that's not a multi-use trail. But I certainly, with the grass strip, is where I was wondering this mayor and council's appetite for, if there's certain challenging, expensive areas, does it potentially, for a certain area, make sense to have a smaller grass strip, for example, instead of 5 feet?
Councilmember Morthland, did you have a comment? I saw your hand earlier.
This is more of a question for the mayor and council. Would this be something that we could lean on the Transportation Commission to provide feedback on?
I'll address that. It's a great question, Will. And I definitely think that the Transportation Commission will be called upon to be part of multimodality solutions. And so I don't want to say yes or no, but I'm going to do the old trick of answering a question with a question. So my perspective, the whole thing that we've worked, you and I and Lee and Christine and Mike and Peter, well, we'll leave Peter out since he stepped out. But we've worked hard on this Transportation Commission for months, and we've talked a lot about it for months. And it's had a philosophical guide. And I think that's why we talked about reorientating all of our boards and commissions so that we could bring clarity. That, it's just not nilly-willy. This is not a willy-nilly, nilly-willy proposition for us. It's coming from a place of intent. And what does that intent? And the first intent is that we want to honor what we believe is the intent of Roswell residents with transportation. Transportation is a big word. It means a lot of things, i.e., it does mean multi-purpose trails. But I think the overarching purpose that we want to get to, at some point it is, do we want them weighing in on every multimodality project? Probably. But at the same time, I think that there needs to be a structure that happens, and a discipline and a process to that point so that things happen quickly and they don't become bureaucratic, kind of like the conversation we had earlier tonight, where you've got separate structures in the city, but there's not great cohesion. And so for me, the Transportation Commission's overarching mission is to represent the view of the vast majority of residents in Roswell, which we believe means to kind of focusing first on the primary focus of transportation, which is automobile, and that we are trying to balance the fact that Roswell, as a unique city in North Fulton, understanding some of the decisions that were made 30 and 40 years ago and how that manifests itself in transportation and where it puts us today and where it'll put us 10 years from now. And I'm saying a lot to say a little. And what little I want to say is that Roswell wants car traffic, to be destination-oriented, not cut-through-oriented. And that the overarching purpose of this on projects, particularly as it relates to automobiles, will be to, as much as possible, to implement that philosophy, is to implement a philosophy of less automobiles, and when automobiles are in place, that automobiles are used for destination traffic and not cut-through traffic, and understanding that the city has 250,000 cars already every day that go through it that are simply pass-through or cut-through traffic. And so that it's our intent as the elected body representing the citizens, the residents of the city, is that we will do our darndest. But as projects come on, whether they're from RDOT, GDOT, right, DOT, doesn't matter, that there will be the emblematic, there will be the vision of the Roswell resident trying to protect the quality of life and not facilitate more cut-through traffic. I know you asked a simple question, but I guess there are so many transportation projects that are focused and circled around roads right now that my head is thinking about literally the 12 projects on the table right now that I want the Transportation Commission to look at, evaluate, and start weighing in on, and knowing that it is a giant task. Your question's spot on. I guess I know they got a lot ahead of them. And so I don't know if, practically speaking, the long-winded answer is Probably not yet. The answer is yes, but probably not yet. I know probably council disagrees, so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was the reason I was bringing it up, because the Transportation Commission is going to be brand new. They're going to have a big plate in front of them, and I didn't know if we wanted to fill their plate with some of these, or if we wanted to keep them on task with the things that are forthcoming. So,
This all falls underneath your purview, baby. This is all you. These trails, this is all you.
Yes, Councilmember Hall first.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just a question, on the other side, on the south side of Old Alabama Road, what is the width of that sidewalk and that grass strip? Do we,
On this side,
I'm talking south of Holcomb Bridge Road. We just finished those sidewalks where that roundabout is. Towards the river, going down from, on,
I believe that's 10.
that's a 10, and how, the grass strip? I mean, it would be nice to mirror that, and the follow-up question to that is, I believe the trees, I don't know if the trees are planted on that section yet. I know a resident had asked about that.
So Mr. Cox is saying 2 feet grass strips.
There you go.
It's a curvy one near the roundabout.
Well, that's the
Take
nor-
liberty to adjust it as needed.
Yes. This is the normal traffic pattern. As you can see, there's only one automobile here on the road.
Yes, so yeah, down here it's a little bit wider.
So it is 5 feet there.
It's like 5 to 6.
Oh, wow. But then it looks like you did it shorter where there was the curves.
Yeah.
And are trees still missing from this area? Are there supposed to be trees planted in that 5-foot grass area?
Of course,
don't-
there's supposed to be trees in the beauty strip.
On this section, I don't think, we don't have any plans to put any trees right now.
Okay. Thought there were supposed to be trees, but if, I would think that we continue that going up.
Councilmember Hills? Comment.
I like option 3. Can you tell me a little bit about that not slope, not retaining wall, number 3, what that little thing is? What does that look like? Just briefly.
So number 3 is a little bit, I mean, it is kind of a combination slope and retaining wall. There will still be a slope. So with option 3, the retaining wall would only be in some segments. It wouldn't be continuous along the whole frontage. That would only be in a couple segments to avoid the existing trail that's already in the park. So it would be a total of like 250 feet along of the 1,200 feet of the frontage where we would need that retaining wall. And that wall would be probably some sort of like block wall that we would use, like a rubble wall.
That's the wall that for the mountain bikers are gonna use on and off the trail, correct? They're gonna jump off of that point, come back up. Seriously, it's what it looks like. It looks like a great jumping off point.
We will likely have some sort of handrail along the park frontage.
I mean, so let me ask, just looking at this, I was surprised that I liked option 1 the best, just in terms of the aesthetics. So help me understand, and then just so happens, it happens to cost the least, and it has the less impact to trees. So I'm going, this is too easy, right? Way too easy, I'm missing something. What am I missing?
Is it the biggest tree impact? You have to take the most trees?
Yeah, it's the largest.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Let me ask you a question.
And there are no specimen, we did coordinate with the city arborist, and there are no specimen trees in any option, but
So you're saying these are all pine trees?
not all pine trees, but
Vast majority?
about 45%.
How many trees are we talking about?
In option one, close to 130 trees.
And the difference in cost?
So option one has about 130 trees. Option two would be about 60 to 70 trees. And option three is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 trees.
So in option,
30 trees.
so we're talking about 30 trees. How much money do I save on option one?
Between 1 and 3.
Between one and three, I mean, the amount of money that would need for the additional trees, I mean, it would probably about balance out with the cost of the wall is $70,000.
So if I did option one, it's going to cost me about 30 trees versus option three, right? I'm going to save money and I'm going to have a better looking project in terms of the trails and the use of the trails.
But there is some additional impact. There's a little bit more impact with option one. There is some impact to the existing trails.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's at least two spots you can kind of see. So the area is highlighted in red there. Yeah, the red boundary with the green highlight. The wall, so with option two, the retaining wall would basically go from approximately here to approximately here. And there is an existing trail that comes in kind of along the red line here, but then it continues right here. So the retaining wall for option three would kind of be in this section right here to avoid the trail, and then in this section right here.
If I'm walking this trail today and you put in this new trail, which one am I going to be happier with in terms of how it looks and how I use it?
That's if you're walking the trail.
Depends if you're in the park or if you're along the road, because there's an elevation difference.
Can I just ask a question? When we first saw this, was there ever an option of bringing this through the park, this multi-use trail, and combining it with that other trail somehow?
That was something we had looked at, but it was determined by transportation staff along with Recreation and Parks Department staff and the mayor and council at that time that we did not want to go through the park.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. Jeff, can you come up here?
I was already ready.
Yeah. So, thank you, Chairman. Do I have your permission?
Absolutely.
Sounds, just take a wild guess here. Sounds like this might need a little rethinking philosophically. So, forgive me, council. Sounds like we've gotten a choice that maybe we don't need to even make a choice. Maybe needs to go back to the drawing board on the philosophical design, because you have a new mayor and council that might give you a different direction on terms of the determination of this anyway.
Could be. The three factors that we were looking at, and as we talk about the trail in this section, just to kind of lay all the bits and pieces, is you have what is proposed to be the multi-use trail along Old Alabama. Then you transition into the pedestrian trail. Then you transition into the mountain biking trail. So you have three uses potentially stacked from the edge of the road into the park. We do not allow mountain bikers on the pedestrian trail. And so that was kind of the driving force of trying to separate those uses and maintain that trail spatial requirements in this area. The pedestrian trail circumvents the entirety, or is kind of on the outside of all of the mountain biking trails. And as we're looking at the expansion of multi-use trails on the road and then the adjacency to those uses. That was kind of the driving force of the discussion of should we start to combine them, and do you potentially overlay too many uses in one area that creates a lot of traffic and potentially some cross traffic of mountain biking and pedestrians, or keep them separate? So that's what we were wrestling with.
So what answer
original
did you,
time.
what answer did you get? What's the answer you came up with?
Guidance from mayor and council at the time was build the multi-use trail along the right-of-way, keep the pedestrian trail where it is, keep the mountain biking, and separate all three, which is what you're seeing here.
Yes, Councilmember Hall?
I just remember discussion about that it might be nice to have the trail through the woods. And there was some discussion that some people felt that maybe people wouldn't feel safe in the woods, that they feel more safe closer to the street, just from my recollection.
Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
So I think there's definitely some different opportunities here. And given it sounds like there's some interest in 3, there's potentially some interest in 1. There's some interest in 1 or 3 with a slightly smaller grass strip to save some money and save some trees. And I think it could be worth just exploring and really potentially deferring this item to be sure that we don't want to consider having part of it go into the park, because I do remember some neighbors and specifically someone from Bike Roswell giving some feedback. I cannot find the notes on what exactly that feedback was, but I felt like it was in support of potentially something different than was being discussed. So from that standpoint, I'd love us to consider deferring this 2 weeks or a month, but if this council wants to move forward, then certainly I think that we have multiple good outside the box ideas.
Mike, sorry, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
ma'am.
I think you're exactly right, Mike. I would echo that. And I would echo in terms of consideration, just on the consideration on the table, I would put down cost distinctions, number of trees to be cut down, what kind of trees are going to be cut down, and the number of tree distinctions going to be cut down based upon, so we're talking, hey, it's 60 trees on option, 130 trees on option 1, and it's 60 trees on option 2 and 100 trees on option 3, and we're talking over a distance of what, how many hundreds of feet?
1,200, about 1,200 feet.
1,200 feet. So there needs to be some understanding, is like, hey, you're gonna lose 60 trees, but that's over 1,200 feet, so that there's a spatial understanding, and everybody understands what that looks like. And what's the cost distinction? But I think more importantly, what do we want? Not too bad. I think so. We need to be clear on that. What do we actually want?
Because I definitely want to understand more and be reminded of the discussion on what are the pros and cons of having it go entirely in the park, partially in the park, maybe whether it's half that distance, full that distance, just really understanding that and seeing what the different options are and therefore the cost savings and tree savings as well.
Do I hear, based on mayor and council comments, that you would like this to be brought back with more detail and description at a future committee meeting?
Yes,
Okay, all right. We'll work on
it's a
that.
motion.
It's a guidance item.
Oh, it is guidance. Oh, I apologize. Oh, yeah.
There's your guidance.
Uh,
Guide it back.
All right. Thank you. Any further comments or questions on this matter? Discussion item, and will be brought back to a future commission for further discussion. All right. And then the next item, we'll go back to item number 7, consideration of a policy to allow for new rectangular rapid flashing beacon sponsorship opportunity.
Sorry, so with me tonight is Mushtaba Ali Mohammadi, who helped put together a draft policy to address requests for rectangular rapid flashing beacons, as well as potentially new sidewalks. And what you have in your package is a draft policy, and I'm going to flip this just because I think we may want to talk about this flow chart a bit. You just flip that to clockwise. I just can't get over there. I can't do it left-handed, sorry. So the basic intent of this policy is to create a policy that would allow residents, businesses, HOAs to request a rectangular flashing beacon, which we've had several of that have been requested in the city in the past couple of years. These have become much less expensive, very popular. We have several in the city. We don't have a formal policy to address them per se in terms of when they're applied or how. And it also includes the provision for requesting a crosswalk if a crosswalk doesn't already exist in a particular location. So with that, by way of background, the two purposes were to provide some guidance and an application that interested residents could provide to the city to initiate the process, and also to clarify whether there was funding available from a private source that could contribute to making these happen a little quicker in specific locations. So we've got some general, how does the process work, some information requested in terms of an application form, a simple one-pager, and the criteria that are on the technical side from a traffic and safety and public safety protection standpoint, and financial contribution from the applicant that we've put together for your consideration as a first draft of this policy. And with that, I'll turn it over for questions and answers. The flow chart that's up here is an example of a flow chart for a similar process that we found in the Oregon Department of Transportation, and thought it was particularly helpful and relevant and might help make the decision-making or thought process a little easier to follow. So with that, I will be quiet and address any questions that you may have.
Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I was actually trying to figure out the flow chart earlier, and I'm struggling with it a little bit. Because if you go to the very first column, is the speed limit greater than 40? And if there's an X, I imagine you don't move forward on that line. And if there's a check mark, you move forward on that line, and it's not recommended. So.
And that's a general thing, which is high speed roads are generally not a location where these would be recommended.
To clarify for Councilmember Hall's question, it's if I understood your question, it's actually the opposite here. Basically, a check means yes, and an X means no. And so therefore, the X actually means to move forward because it's not above 40 miles per hour up there.
Okay, thank you.
Counterintuitive.
Yes. Yeah, X means go.
I'm like, okay.
Good.
X go.
Yeah.
So X means go.
Yeah.
Good clarification.
So it really means no, but it's just a no to the question. It's irrelevant if you move forward. So this is something where I certainly feel there should be all over Roswell. It should be easier for neighborhoods and residents, businesses, et cetera, just to advocate for pedestrian safety. And as I've been on council, I've seen some situations where there'd be a neighborhood that would request it at the exact perfect time and get a big push and just and just be able to get one approved, which I'm glad they did. I always support them. That being said, I want it to be easier for residents and neighborhoods across the city. Obviously, there needs to be a process where staff can be recommending if council does approve or does not approve, because certainly there's logistics that need to go into it from staff. But again, the goal is just making it easier to request these. And then as for it mentions, I forget what term staff used, but for some funding aspects, with this, I think it was just the opportunity to ensure that if a neighborhood's requesting it, they really are wanting it. There's a little bit of skin in the game, because I think what we wouldn't want is for every single neighborhood and area to request one. if there's not a real desire and thing, you know, et cetera. So I think it's a good opportunity for the city to obviously contribute, and also other neighbors or sponsoring businesses or whatever it might be. But just hopefully creating some more pedestrian safety across our city. So I support this. Certainly, if the mayor and council have any updates or improvements, I certainly am confident I'll support those. But also, I want to remind you that even if you're willing to approve this, it does not mean that just there'd be a free for all. Ultimately, mayor and council would still have a vote to decide if it's something they want to do or not. And of course, that would be coming with staff guidance. And so it's something where there'd certainly be a process. But again, I just want to make it clear, because I feel right now, perhaps if you have a connection to City Hall, or you know how different processes work, you might know that it's possible, yes or no. But I don't want it to be that way. I want you to be able to live in a neighborhood. You have no understanding or familiarity with any city processes, but you just see, here's a policy, and if they decide if their neighborhood or their street wants to request one or not.
Yes, Councilmember Hills?
To your guidance point, Councilmember Palermo, is there guidance from staff about the volume of them, like the frequency? Let's say I live down the street from a council member and we each want one, and we submit the same day. Who gets the light? Who gets the mechanism? How does that work?
Yes, there are. The expert on that is next to me in terms of how close they can be to one another. But it also, two other points that I wanted to mention just verbally that the conversation prompted. One, there is a mention of cost in your item, and the costs that are mentioned of $8,000 to $16,000 are for the bare bones, no ancillary crosswalk or curb and gutter type work to go with it. Those can easily drive the cost of implementation towards $50,000 for an installation. So just that is a constraint in many respects, just from an economic standpoint. And to your proximity question, there are some guidelines both for these electronic beacon locations as well as crosswalks. So there are locations where Mashtaba is probably going to say, that is not a good location for a crosswalk. But there are transportation code requirements and guidelines for how close some of these things can be to one another, correct?
There are, and I don't know the exact numbers, but there are all these numbers for very specific issues. How close crosswalks can be, how close crosswalks with RFBs can be, whether they can be close to signals, traffic lights, whether they can or they should be close to intersections. We have some notation on those in the policy text as well.
So would this be, if a regular resident was interested, they would be able to find this potentially on the website, and then this policy would be with it so that they could read through and have at least a basic idea of?
Yes, we typically would post all of our policies on the website and make them available, as well as conversations with staff on just how they're applied and whether or not their particular location looks very attractive from multiple kind of points of view. The other point that I meant to mention is that the police chief or their designee, who also are extremely well informed on traffic safety and patterns and risks, are involved in the review and the approval of any application that would come through.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Hall?
So my question is very high level. We as a city have a responsibility for the safety of our pedestrians. And I would think that we put these in where we need to. And now this policy is to have HOAs or other groups participate in the cost of one of these. Is that suggesting that the city may not think that they need one for safety, and that's why the city's not putting one in there. And so if they want one, they need to pony up. You can talk to that a little bit.
I would begin by just saying these are a relatively recent technology or tool. In the last 10 years or so, they've become more popular and more affordable. When they began to show up, people saw them and said, I want one of those near my neighborhood. And we thought that a policy to provide some guidance on how, where, and when they may be most applicable would be very helpful in responding to some of those requests that are coming in for put one by my neighborhood. So I think it's in response to their popularity and popular demand, if you will, that we felt a policy would be helpful to clarify how that should work.
Councilmember Palermo?
Yeah, and I definitely agree with Councilmember Hall's sentiment in the sense that I absolutely do feel the city should absolutely continue to be focusing on pedestrian safety and adding these around the city. And that being said, initially when speaking to staff, I was not specifically thinking even just of having some financial partnership with the different neighborhoods, but that's where staff brought it up and felt there's still benefits and advantages. It's really bringing a certain one to a higher priority than perhaps it is on the list, and it was something that staff kind of described as seeing it as a fair way to kind of go to the top of the list, while council's still going to hopefully have its own list that we're certainly prioritizing and accomplishing on our own, in addition and completely separate from this plan.
Yes, Councilmember Morthland?
Very, very quick question. Is there a cost savings to doing the strip flashing lights in the road? If you're to come on the Hawk light scenario, hit the button and you have the Christmas lights that light up on the asphalt as compared to doing a big standalone sign?
Instead of doing the beacons, doing on the pavement, doing it on the pavement. Well, the pavement is more like an accessory to what is approved by the feds in the standard manual, which is the beacon, which is what we are talking in the policy. Those are very nice, and they increase the compliance for these beacons, because these beacons may not be completely compliant because they're not required by law to stop. It catches their attention so that they see, oh, people are trying to cross the road, so I better stop. These are not pedestrians or PHPs as we have, like the new one on SR9. So those that you are referring to will help increase the compliance. They won't be on their own.
They're an accessory.
Yes, Mayor Wilson?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dan, so who established the policy on this?
Drafted this policy.
Is this a transportation policy?
Yes.
Not from the direction of mayor and council, past, previous, or current?
I believe.
So I requested something to make it easier for residents and neighborhoods and businesses to request more pedestrian safety.
Let me ask, so where I'm going with this, because it sounds like you're trying to be a good guy. Sounds like you're trying to do the right thing, but it's a policy decision. Because it costs money, because it's an allotment of resources. And the reason I'm asking that is because Christine kind of asked a very pivotal question. If the resources are needed, right, and if they're a crucial, shouldn't the city be providing those resources? It wouldn't be a P3 partnership program. It would be, hey, city, step in, take care of the safety of your residents, right? That would be a clear philosophical directive. We would have that. Sounds like cool technology. Sounds like people want it. Sounds like it's neat. Sounds like it's useful. Doesn't sound like it's a clear critical path, yet we kind of got in a cooperative mode of sharing the cost on it. And I'm wondering, that's a policy issue, right? It's a policy directive. It's a policy cost question in terms of cost. So I'm wondering if you're trying to be a good guy and trying to serve two masters.
No, I'd say I'm the one saying I want to see it easier for neighborhoods and residents to request this. The big example that came to mind for me was on Crabapple. So I forget which neighborhood it was. It might have been Roswell Station, whatever it was on Crabapple, north of Woodstock Road. Basically, at the exact perfect timing, when we were dealing with some mid-year budget, or I forget what it was, a lot of the neighbors all started reaching out, saying, the safety needs, they really want one of these things going in. And I supported it. I proudly supported it. It certainly was helping my goals of just really increasing pedestrian safety everywhere. And so I forget if it was Councilmember Hall or myself or who. I think it was Councilmember Hall that it was able to find some money in the budget and allocate it there. And we proposed it. It passed. And they ended up getting it built, and they were very happy. Safety was increased. And ultimately, my goal is to make it easier for neighborhoods to not need that exact perfect timing of when to make the push, but instead have a clear policy. And also, I think from a safety standpoint, I think these are great where I do want to see them more everywhere, and I want to see them where the city's paying for more everywhere. However, if it's coming from a request from a neighborhood instead of a request from RDOT or recommendation from RDOT, then I do think staff's recommendation made sense for there to be some shared costs instead of just the city cost, unless mayor and council chose to waive that or do otherwise.
But if it's not a critical path, the shared cost still means all residents are paying for it.
Towards it.
And I know, I know your neighborhood's different because you got, 6 or 7 of these going in your neighborhood, and everybody gets that. We're all on board for that. But in all seriousness, if it's not a critical path and a neighborhood wants it, let's say my neighborhood wants one, and the city says, we're going to help you do that. We're going to help you figure out where it needs to go and if you need multiple ones and what the logic behind that is. We know it's cool and we know you like it, and we will help you ascertain and we'll actually put it in. But why would the city pay for that?
So what I'd argue is we see that all over the city, sidewalks, from a sidewalk standpoint. The city is constantly putting in sidewalks in different parts of the city, and not every resident walks every single mile of every sidewalk of the city. But I do feel our city is better by having more pedestrian activity and pedestrian safety all over the city. And so with these things, there'll be some that you might use, some that you might not use, but I think our city is better if we have more traffic calming measures and we have more pedestrian safety and all that. But I think what I'm hearing is, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's not that you potentially are opposed to this policy request. What you're potentially opposed to is the idea of the city paying anywhere. Where if I'm hearing you correctly, you'd potentially support this policy, but instead of the city contributing some towards it, you'd rather have just that neighborhood, that business, whomever, they've just got to pay the full amount, but then they can get this thing in there.
It's a priority question, right? So, listen, I wish the city could pay for everything. Wherever we needed these, let's put them in. But we have to make policy choices based upon priorities. So stormwater is a perfect example. So dredging is going to become a bigger and bigger equation. And so the city has a participatory dredging program, which ironically nobody's taken advantage of to date. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's a difficult problem to fund. It's a difficult problem to ascertain. But the reality is the city is helping to make its resources known on how to get dredging done, and that there is a potential reimbursement for part of that dredging. But the HOA has to lay the money out first, right? And it's arguable that perhaps stormwater has greater ramifications upon the quality of life of more residents. Every one of us supports the pedestrian and bike and master plan, the bike and pedestrian master plan. Every one of us does. Every one of us supports multimodalities. Every one of us wants more. Your Hawks Ridge crossing here, great success. We all love it. Can't do enough of it. As you know, every one of us worked tirelessly on adding calming measures on Oxbow. We're working tirelessly on putting traffic calming measures, you name it, on every project. It's a big part of our modus operandi. We're all geared this way. We want to have more multimodalities in all of our neighborhoods. And I want to be able to offer it, right? I said, yeah. The question is who pays for it. If it's a high priority or it's part of our master plan and we're directing traffic, if you will, to use the pun, I think it's our responsibility to pay for it. if it's a individual neighborhood and it says, and it's their own directive, the question is, do they pay for it, we pay for it, or do we split it? And I think that's kind of the policy question that Matt.
Exactly. And I think you brought up some good examples, because I'd argue on Oxbow, we should have one. I think there's some areas on Oxbow where it makes sense to have one. And that's something where I feel that's a city priority, that's something the city's gonna pay for, and not asking for any neighborhood to pay towards. But the example you used, if there's Brookfield wants what, keep in mind too, this discussion is not actually in a neighborhood. So my assumption is this is not in a neighborhood, this is on a major road that perhaps.
Arterial road.
Yes, thank you. So ultimately, you've got Brookfield wants one, and you've got Chickering wants one, and you've got Brookfield, the RDOT says is actually probably the number 6 priority. It's not getting funded anytime soon, it's number 6. Chickering, let's just say it's, at a number 9 priority, it's definitely not being funded anytime soon.
That has nothing to do with that there are more voters in Chickering, is it, than Brookfield?
But on a serious note though with it, if we agree that it does create more safety and create more just pedestrian walkability and therefore just the quality of life for many residents, both living in and near the neighborhood, if I've got Chickering wanting to pay 50% of the cost, and I've got Brookfield wanting to pay 0% of the cost, but according to RDOT from some subjective measures, because let me rephrase that. They're objective, but ultimately the scoring on how you decide which ones to weight greater end up always being subjective. That's what we've seen as we've walked through the sidewalk policy 1,000 different times. So ultimately, even though through their measures they say Brookfield's number 6 priority, Chickering's number 9, Chickering's willing to pay 50%, Brookfield's willing to pay 0. That's where I'd see we get more bang for our buck and a more increased safety by going with the one that has some skin in the game. So that's why I like the idea of the city paying something. If instead of 50%, it's 25%, or heck, even if it's 0%, I just still want to make it easier for.
I love your thinking, I love your strategy. I want to add one piece to it. This is the piece that's missing. So, on repavement, do you have a scheduling by neighborhood and street?
On repaving,
Yeah, on paving streets.
we have a priority list for
Yes.
repaving and a condition assessment process that we go through annually
Oh, why?
to assess the condition of roads sequentially throughout the city,
Yeah, why?
to prioritize the ones for repaving, sir.
And so who's making those decisions?
At this point, staff is making
The
recommendations.
city's making those
Yes,
decisions
sir.
based upon priorities,
Yes, sir.
based upon a holistic perspective,
Yes.
not the individual subdivisions. Don't get me wrong, you get plenty of, hey, I need you here, right? And you have to say, oh my God, we're getting beat up. But you're making as objective as possible policy decisions based upon a rotation of when to pave and repave roads, right? On a holistic perspective, right? On a schedule. Point being, if you want to implement this and there's a competition for it, shouldn't you have the same kind of criteria?
No, and here's why. Because, so I've actually looked at this a lot. Unfortunately, the objective paving, there's a lot of aspects that are not objective. And we can definitely walk through in another, hour or two of just different aspects of it where it's not perfect. At the end of the day, you do have 2 different neighborhoods where through the process, and they did it on their own, there's no elected officials, anybody else getting involved, but ultimately, there's some of it's impossible to be 100% scientific. And that's where truly, if we had one neighborhood saying, hey, we'll pay for half of our paving, and the other one won't, I'd love to go with the half. Nobody in this city would ever pay for any of their street to be paved. So it's not a realistic thing, but if that was the case, that'd be getting more bang for our buck. This thing is so popular that we do have a lot of residents saying, you know what, I would pay. I believe there'd be this situation where people would say, I would pay towards more safety for children crossing the street, things like that, slowing down traffic. So that's why. But that being said, certainly in the pursuit of just finding a compromise, although I'd love the idea of having more of these and having residents paying towards it, and therefore I'd love to incentivize that, I certainly would support having this policy, but it's just the requester or the business, the sponsor, whoever, has to pay 100% of it, in which case I think then it sounds like we're in agreement.
No, Michael, if this is about protecting the children,
Yeah.
obviously we're all in agreement.
Yeah, it's for the children.
I think the more overarching process you have gives you the best opportunity to, one, not be herky-jerky in your decision-making, to be more effective in the implementation and the efficacy, the use of your dollars. And three, making true determinations. Is it a political decision or is it a policy decision? And I'm not clear. What I don't hear is, I can't hear, because Christine, when she asked that question, I'm going, oh, she's so right. If this is an imperative, then why are we asking residents to singularly pay for something that's that important?
Because we can't afford to put them all out. We can't afford to buy them all. I would love these all over the city where every neighborhood got to feel safe when crossing their arterial roads with cars going too fast, et cetera. But scarcity is a fact of life, in which case I want to make it easier for residents to request it. But I also certainly agree that the city should not be picking up the full price, knowing that every neighborhood would want one if that were available.
I think we should use that same strategy on everything else. I think we use that on paving of roads.
Sidewalks.
Putting sidewalks, yeah. I think let's just go half-half on everything from
What
this
about
point forward.
flock camera license plate readers in neighborhoods?
We make them pay 100% of that. So they pay 100%
They do pay
of that.
100%.
They pay 100%
No,
of
but
that.
we have them going in on the city's
That's to your
tab,
point.
too.
That's about safety. That's more about safety, Michael. Flock cameras are more about safety in reality, and yet we make the HOAs pay 100%.
Again, my goal is just I want to make it easier for neighborhoods to be able to request this. So if to get a majority vote, it's just a matter of the city's not going to pay anything towards that. I'm okay with that. What I just don't want to see is that neighborhoods don't have the ability to request it, because the fact is they have requested it in the past. They have gotten it. I'm happy they did. But again, I think there's a better way.
I'm just going to say, sorry, Christine, are we not putting more pressure on him as staff to make policy decisions that are not fair for him to make?
The policy decision is ours. I asked
At
him.
the end of the day, but he's directing the traffic towards us.
No.
He's already making,
No, this is making it easier on him, because what he got in the past was political pressure. In the past, what would happen is.
you don't think he's getting political pressure on this?
No, I mean from residents. So in the past, what would happen is a neighborhood would say, all right, now's the right time. We're going to bombard RDOT, bombard the mayor and council, and we're gonna kind of push them through. And I'm glad they do, because I'm happy with the outcome. But I'd much rather have an official process where here's the application, it's going to be approved by mayor and council, and it levels the playing field. So it doesn't matter if you know how City Hall works or you don't. All that matters is, can you read the policy? And the policy is, these things create more pedestrian safety. Let's make them easier to request. But again, I'm fine with cutting out the city partner part. I'm fine with just saying you have to pay for it all.
Councilmember Hall.
Okay, I have two comments. Very good spirited discussion. Two comments. When I was transportation liaison, I drafted a policy for golf cart crossings, where if neighborhoods wanted a golf cart crossing and wanted to pay for it, basically very similar. They would just fill out the application and transportation would quote it. They'd pay for it, and transportation would give them, design a golf cart crossing. So we have something like that in the city that exists. And that's for safety too. I mean, that's for golf carts to be able to safely go. And my second thought was, if the neighborhoods or folks pay for these crossings, should there be excess budget funds, just like for dredging, because the dredging is only funded if it's funded. So neighborhoods right now go and dredge, and their option to get reimbursed for their 50% according to the rules is only available to them if it's funded. So could there be a waiting list of folks for opportunities when there's budget excess that we could refund them at that time? That's just an idea.
Yes, Mayor Wilson.
I have one question, Dan. How much in the budget is allocated to this program in transportation?
So there's no specific program for this flashing beacon or crosswalk installation. However, there is a program for traffic management,
It's
speed
speed
management,
management, pedestrian safety enhancement, yeah.
and that is funded in the next, proposed in the next year budget, I want to say.
It's been 35K every year, but next year we are proposing for 50.
I thought I saw it in the budget. I thought I saw it in the budget.
I should have asked this question from the very get-go. We would have saved ourselves a lot of time. So we're talking about $35,000 and $50,000 FY 2023.
Yes, sir.
So to save time, because I think we could discuss this for another hour, I'm going to make a motion that might pass or might fail, but I'd like to update this to not be partnered with the city, but instead funded by the requester. And again, I do sincerely believe that these flashing beacons are good all over the city. They slow down traffic, they increase pedestrian safety. And if a neighborhood wants to request one, I think there should be an easy process and policy for them to do it.
Yes, was a motion? That was a motion, Councilmember Palermo?
That was a motion, but I should certainly wait for more
All right,
discussion.
sure.
I just want to make sure everybody's not wasting their time. Yeah.
Yes. Any second to the motion or question?
I think she's got a question, yeah?
Yeah. Clarification, so these would be prioritized by staff, not by the bombardment of a neighborhood?
So
Political pressure.
the way the current process works is basically a neighborhood fills out the application, staff looks at it based on all their criteria, they give a recommendation to approve or recommendation to deny.
But you'd mentioned earlier about, the neighborhood gets together and bombards staff, it's political pressure.
Oh, for the
I'm
way,
thinking-
for the way it would go historically. Historically, it would be getting with staff to understand kind of the need, but more it would be on the mayor and council because there's no process. So instead, it's just a matter of sending enough requests in, which again, I'm very glad, I'm very proud to have supported these every time. But it's just, I think we're better off with an official policy versus that unofficial process that we just say.
Yes, Councilmember Vanstrom.
Councilwoman Hall, how would you incorporate in the motion what you just mentioned about the dredging? I like that concept where you're including that split.
Maybe, Dan, could you explain how the dredging program is, it's not a funded program, but we have a program, it's just not funded. And I think as city council makes funds available, the reimbursements would happen. Is that?
That's correct. The program does exist. It does have a 50-50 match potential in the existing dredging policy, but it is not funded routinely. It is only funded based on review and approval of an application package and brought to mayor and council for approval and an associated budget amendment to cover the city's contribution at that time. So it's only once they go through the
And they have to execute and spend the money, and we reimburse it after the project's done.
Correct.
Which is a huge distinction.
I like it. So I'd like to amend my motion with staff adding that logic.
All right. Councilmember Palermo's has amended his motion. Is there a second?
And that's good sausage making.
Second.
Yeah.
Second by Councilmember Vanstrom. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. We do have a recreation and parks item. Number 9, consideration to award a contract to Signature Tennis Courts
there.
Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $84,000 for a rebuild of tennis courts 11 and 12 at Roswell Area Park. Mr. Leatherman.
Thank you, sir. Mayor and Council, this is a report back from our last committee meeting. There were a number of questions that you requested, and so The details are included in the report. I'm just going to cover the highlights, and then if there's any other outstanding questions, please let me know. Kind of first major question that we were talking about, and as a recap for those maybe that are listening, the question is for courts 11 and 12, and the recommendation is to rebuild those tennis courts that they've run their useful life. And first major question was, when was the last time those courts were built or rebuilt? We went back through the history. Those courts have not been rebuilt. They were built about 20 years ago, so they have reached their useful life, and so this would be the first rebuild that we would be recommending for those courts. Best we can tell, it looks like late 90s, early 2000s at the very earliest, probably like 95, 96, based on some recollection from park staff. We were talking about the lower position of those courts in doing some research and looking back at our higher water events. We don't see any water inundation from the creek at those courts, which was a question from our last meeting. But we do see kind of the cracks that are developing are based on rainfall. Especially in the wintertime, you'll get water intrusion into some of the cracks that will cause some of the splitting as we move forward as well. Basic industry standards for asphalt courts, which are those types of courts, are roughly about 15 to 20 years of useful life, assuming that you're doing some ongoing resurfacing, which is usually about every 4 to 5 years, depending on the condition of the courts, how well they're used, and how well they're built. That's kind of the high level about the courts themselves. We also were talking about some other options of surfaces, primarily clay courts and or concrete courts. We've included in the report just some high-level items about maintaining and managing clay courts. From an operational perspective, they're much higher in the maintenance cost and requirements. You're essentially reworking those fields on a daily basis, or those courts on a daily basis. About every 5 to 6 years, you're coming back through and you have to laser grade those again to make sure that they're level and continue on a playable surface. During the hot summer months, you also have to shut them down in the middle of the day to rewater them to make sure that the consistency stays. So there's a high level of just maintenance requirements on those courts. The tension concrete behave a little bit similar to asphalt. They are built out of concrete. You do get a little bit longer useful life in that 30-year range, but about a 30% higher costs on the installation originally than the asphalt. And you do have to resurface those courts about the same pace every 3 to 5 years on the tension concrete. So, you know, the cost to benefit ratio, what we found is most courts are being built out of the asphalt. There are some very high level that are going to the concrete, but they're willing to invest the money. I think we have one example. Auburn University just rebuilt their tennis center, and they went with the asphalt as the decision for their space. Just some other anecdotal information. We were talking about the reservations and functionally how that works. I just want to make one clarifying point. We have the reservation cost listed in your report as $5 per hour. It's actually $6 per hour. That was an error on my part, so I wanted to make that clarification. Residents get 7 days in advance to reserve those, and guests or non-residents are 3 days in advance if they want to reserve a court. The manual pass information, resident costs $120, non-resident $180. And then we also have a punch card, which is essentially 10 reservations, about $40 for a resident, $60 for a non-resident. Anecdotally, we just went through and looked. We're running about a 12% non-resident reservation rate. So the vast majority of the reservations that we're seeing are from our residents. And then we also have a number of graphs that were included just looking at the percentage of usage based on the total hours that are available. You'll also notice that we're kind of hovering in about that 25, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% total use rate on a reservation basis. That doesn't account for any of the courts that are being used on a first-come, first-served basis. So that is only looking at those that are making a reservation. If somebody shows up potentially at a low-use time during the week, maybe on a Tuesday, they could be playing on a court and we wouldn't know about that because they didn't have to make a reservation. They would show up on a first-come, first-served basis. RAP 11 and 12 specifically, which are the courts that we're talking about today, we ran those numbers from last calendar year. We're running about a 25% use basis based on programming and reservations, total of about 2,700 hours that were reserved on those two courts combined in the last calendar year. I think that covered the vast majority of the research requests and information requests. Our recommendation is to move forward with the rebuild of those courts based on the information that we found. based on the fact that they are still being used even in their current condition, and recognizing that as we continue to move forward, we'll be watching the tennis court use and in any of our future recommendations for expanding the racket sports program as a whole. Just another note on kind of the information that I gave you. That's all the outdoor racket sport information. We do have indoor pickleball, indoor badminton that's not included in any of those use figures that I gave you. Perhaps entertain any other questions.
Thank you. Any questions, comments for Mr. Leatherman? Yes, Mayor Wilson.
Question, Jeff, what is how long does it take to usually resurface a court? I see it here in the contract, there's a timetable.
On the asphalt courts?
Yes, sir.
Give or take 2 to 3 months, depending on whether it, with milling and asphalt, but if you have good conditions, it's usually 30 days, but depending on the time of year.
Did I read right in the contract, it's 45 days for them to execute?
I think,
You want to pull that up real quick and just take a look? We can double check that. I'm sure you probably did.
And it looks like there's a $160 a day punitive clause beyond the 45-day contract per day.
That would make sense. I can pull it up.
Is that that I'm asking because I'm unfamiliar with building tennis courts and what that financial structure looks like. So where would the 160 or $145 a day, where does that number come from?
we base that number off if we had reserved it.
Taylor, come on up.
It was reserved for a 12-hour window.
So just a suggestion from my perspective, that makes logical sense on how you deduce that number. Obviously, the aim is to get the contractor to get done in your allotted time, which looks like it's 45 days. So we're charging you a penalty of what our per use is. My suggestion would be to charge him or her a use, or the contractor, what their cost would be to incentivize them to get the project done. In other words, $145 a day probably doesn't sound like in other words, if I take the difference between the two contractors, there's $16,000 of difference. Divide that by $145. How many days you got?
45 days,
Yes, sir.
$355 on that side of it.
Well, I'm just saying that to exactly so you could, not that I'm saying anybody did this, but you could take the bid, sit on it for $145 a day damages, take an extra 30 days, and you're still less expensive than the other guy if your penalty is your cost basis, not his or her cost basis.
Right, sure.
So, because I think your aim is, hey, I need you to get this done in 45 days. If you don't get it done in 45 days, there's a punitive price that should matter to you, so that you get it done.
Yeah, incentivize that performance a little bit stronger.
Yes, sir. That's my 2 cents.
Makes sense.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? Seeing none, is there a motion to move this item forward? Councilmember Vanstrom, motion by Councilmember Vanstrom,
Motion to move forward.
second by Mayor Wilson.
Clarification.
Yes.
Motion with the amended punitive.
Oh, I don't have a recommendation.
Oh.
I didn't make anything specific.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Do you have got a recommendation you want to make?
No.
I think what we can do also is, as we look at future bid contracts, 'cause I think it'd be wise of us to include those as part of the bid process so everybody is aware coming forward.
Ryan's not here, but I got a question about that,
Yeah.
Jeff, and you may know, and Mr. Chairman, you may know. On a small contract like this, can I incentivize the contractor positively after an award?
I think it would probably be best to be a part of the original contract or the RFP that's been placed in the public domain at that point.
That's kind of what I was thinking as we look at our future contracts going forward, is looking at those incentivizations as well as the penalties to make sure that we describe that in the bid process to everybody that's looking at it equally, just so we're consistent in that way.
You know what, consistency is huge, but exactly. Punitive's fine, but you also want to have incentives, right? You want people to,
Yeah.
be successful and knock out your objective and knock it out better than you anticipated, and there'll be a reward for doing that.
Thank you. We had a motion from Councilmember Van Strom,
Seconded.
second by Mayor Wilson. Further discussion?
Anything you'll put to it? No further discussion.
No further discussion. All right, all those in favor? Thank you. We think we got some guidance on some areas. Further discussion, we have to consider. All right, we do have an administration item on. We do have an administration item on our agenda, and that is the discussion of the discussion of the potential location and acceptance of a donation for a labyrinth on city property. And we have Council Member, excuse me, Councilmember Hall, who will speak to this item. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Knighton. And thank you, Dr. Price, for bringing this forward. And we're getting organized here on the slide. So a little bit of history. Dr. Price had brought this project forward in prior years, and the request was for the city to offer funding for it. And since that time, there was no funding at the time, and over the years, Dr. Price has raised the funds, and she will speak to that. So this is not a project that is asking for the city for any funds, but just basically for a home for this labyrinth project. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Price at this point.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. And good evening, Mayor, Council, staff, and guests. Just want to bring you all up to speed on the labyrinth project. That way. So the question people often ask is, what is a labyrinth? And what's shown here really is a maze, not a labyrinth, but a labyrinth. Oh, it's doing funny things. Okay, not to be confused with a maze. A labyrinth is a flat, two-dimensional historical design. So a maze is three-dimensional, and you can get lost in it. It has multiple paths, but a labyrinth is flat, two-dimensional. A classical unicursoral labyrinth has one path to the center. You walk a labyrinth in the parlance of the labyrinth world, and there are no choices. You can't get lost, same path in and out. This is a historical design. It's been around for a long time, about 5,000 years. We've seen designs of labyrinths on Greek coins, on cave walls, on rock drawings, and there's a lot of Greek mythology surrounding labyrinths, kind of some sordid stories about minotaurs and Theseus slaying the minotaur, but we won't go into that, but it's pretty interesting if you have time to read about it. And we see it in artwork. The minotaur prevailed for many years in the history. Coins in Crete had the minotaur. The center of labyrinths, you often saw the depiction of the Theseus slaying the minotaur. We also seen it in fossilized Irish stone. It's really, they're found in every country in the world. There are about 5,000 labyrinths existing in the world currently. Here's one in Italy. Here's one on a British wall. Here's some using the motif on gargoyles in Victorian England. Here's one also in England, 11 circuits with a number of different stone colors. There's also an octagonal shape in Wales. So sometimes they're inside and sometimes they're outside. It went through a time frame of being outside pagan influences in the early years, then it was sort of adopted by ecclesiastical, in the ecclesiastical realm. So we'll go from the old world now to the new world, seen on cliffs in New Mexico. There's one in the gardens next to a large shopping center in Toronto. There's even one in Georgia, 12 circuits. And the way you count the circuits is like rings of a tree. You just go from the center to the outside. The most visited labyrinth in the world is at the Chartres Cathedral in France. And that's, of course, indoors in the church. There's a replica of that one outdoors in Philadelphia. You see benches around, people look at it. And now just look at the center portion, because that's something we'll want to think about in the future as to personalizing and making very unique the Roswell labyrinth, what to put in that center. There's also one, a smaller one, 8 circuit at Yale in Connecticut. There's one tucked away inside a wall with a gate around it. There are different materials that can be used. On the left, we see natural materials that can be picked up and moved. On the right, it's a permanent structure. So temporary versus permanent is a very important consideration. Natural materials versus something like contrasting pavers or stones that would last a long time. Question people ask is, what do you do with a labyrinth? What do you do in it? Well, you walk the labyrinth. We don't have an ocean or crashing waves, but we can imagine something similar here in Roswell. In this particular picture, we see one fellow entering the labyrinth and then 2 people who are walking it, and they walk sort of to and from, back and forth, always trying to get to the center, and it fools you sometimes that you're not getting there quickly enough. But you eventually get there because you can't get lost, and then you come back out again. So walking the labyrinth is reflective, meditative, and peaceful. It's intriguing to walk. A person engaged in the labyrinth clears his mind and focuses on the journey. It has been likened to a pilgrimage to enlightenment. Historically, it was used as meditation. There were dances, prayers, and devotions. Many labyrinths have also been used for secular purposes. In recent times, we see them therapeutically used in parks, hospitals, and hospices for healing. They provide an architectural enhancement, an interesting design, and can be incorporated with a landscape design as well. We even see them small, like to put in your hand, handheld stress relievers. Also a finger labyrinth called a mindfulness maze. People ask, are these sacred or secular? Well, really, it depends on the beholder and the user. From their perspective, it can be either, whichever floats their boat. There's a renewed interest in labyrinths in recent years. In the 21st century, there's art, video games, and even in the London public transport systems, labyrinthine designs are making a resurgence. And here's some labyrinth design and some art. Here we have the London Metro, or the Tube. And if you're waiting for your train to come, you can go up to the wall and find the red X and move your finger around and, I guess, not get upset when your train hasn't arrived yet. Video games, labyrinths are very prominent. Some of them are much more like a maze, really, than a labyrinth. Also, family games. I think we're all kind of familiar with the idea. What does this mean for Roswell? Well, we have a history of this labyrinth, and I'm not going to go through that. Just going to take them one at a time. It first came to council in around 2013. A student from Independence High School presented it. He wanted to put the labyrinth out here in the front circle. And at that time, of course, there was no money, and it was really the first time that this concept came up for Roswell. So it kind of was batted around, but we didn't really do anything about it. Then the Roswell Women's Club provided some money for a design, and we got it into the original design for the Serenity Gardens, and our city landscape architect designed that. Ended up not being in the finished product, mostly due to budgetary restraints and space issues to put it there. So it was never funded in the budget, but it's come up before other councils. Potential locations have been that area I showed you with at the front of the council, city hall, where the drive around is. Other places on the other side of City Hall, also in front of Smith Plantation, Mimosa Hall, a number of places that for one reason or other
didn't seem to be appropriate. The appropriate oversight committees that have been in discussion are administration, Parks and Rec, and community development for all those different aspects. There has been an anonymous funding source identified and obtained, so the monies will not have to come from tax dollars. And it does have to go through a nonprofit, and the most reasonable and amenable group is the Roswell Arts Fund. We did talk about this briefly in December, and I think some of you were there. It was just getting it up to speed, and we're really moving forward. So we have definitely come a long way. And just to reiterate, this is our aerial view of City Hall where it was originally proposed, and you see that that's just a lot of cars, a lot of activity, not a very tranquil area. And when you look compared to the other side of City Hall where it's very peaceful, this side, a lot of trees. The Faces of War Memorial is a very contemplative and reflective place, and it's a lot of paths. It's just a nice place to be. We were out there, a number of council members have been able to visit the site that I was proposing, and just while we were standing there talking, many people walked by. So it's utilized a great deal out there for contemplation. So a labyrinth in that general area would enhance the very peaceful setting that's already there. It's accessible to the public for reflection, meditation, serenity, and, here's the big and, we have a multi-purpose, multi-use adaptation and purpose. This was historical, a labyrinth that was uncovered, a very elaborate and intricate design, and a beautiful center motif, and around the edge it appeared to be either a wall or seating. So this is also found here in Roswell up by the square, and there's some tiered seatings around a small circular brick patio. So this is the idea that we came up with to utilize the labyrinth for more than just walking the labyrinth. So we thought we could use it for outdoor education, environmental education, scout groups, just a number of education purposes. Also, staff meetings could be held out there. Everybody wants to get out in the fresh air, nice break away from the office or indoors. Also, theatrical, musical, other presentations. We could even have council, mayor and council go out there to get away from this room and council chambers where you spend a whole lot of time. We're going to get you out of here really quickly. So using this space for theatrical performances would be really exciting, and musical performances as well. Also, the parking that's here and walking to Canton Street, it would be ideal to have something on that side that would also be an attraction to encourage people to park over here. Also, it would complement the Memorial Day celebration and the Faces of War Memorial, and the proposed spot would not interfere with that celebration at all, which incidentally is going to happen again this year. We're so excited. So this would provide a permanent circular space with a diameter somewhere between 45 and 80 feet. Now, the Chartres Cathedral is 42 feet in diameter, and of course, it depends on the number of circuits that you decide to have. It would be completely wheelchair accessible because there would be nothing other than 2 dimensions. So the preferred, most accessible site really is behind City Hall, where the natural terrain can accommodate a large labyrinth with tiered stone or brick seating on the sloped upper side. So again, we're at the aerial view looking at this area behind, which is a huge area. Then we've honed in on a little bit of a zoom. This picture is taken from approximately the site proposed looking up backwards towards City Hall. So this is the general location. Now, in this picture, it looks big because it's about the size of the rotunda, which is about 85 feet wide. So really, this is definitely out of scale, but that's kind of the location, and it makes everybody happy to look at it. But here's actually more to scale. This is about 42 feet in diameter and a little better placed. So it's not that close to City Hall. It's down closer to the to the walkway. Again, remembering that a stoned edging or tiered seating would enhance this design. This is a computer rendering of what this would look like from the path. And so the actual labyrinth would be here, and then 2 rows of tiered seating, which probably hold 20 to 30 people. In stone, the same as, or brick rather, the same as City Hall. So it's really a very elegant, sophisticated product that would be professionally installed. And this would be the view from the mayor's office, because he was concerned about looking at it. And this would be really what he would see from there, would be the backside of the benches. And we would like to fit this, obviously, into the master plan that's being worked on. Community engagement, we've got the anonymous donor who has to work through a nonprofit, so the Roswell Arts Fund is agreeable to that. Other groups that we'll pull into it as we want to landscape it and do various things. And then groups that have already been asked to participate and are providing input for the product: the Women's Club, the Arts Fund, Historic Roswell Beautification Project, Garden Club, Kiwanis Club, Rotary Club, and others. So luckily, the money aspect is not a concern. We've already worked with a civil engineer who's worked with the city before to look at the drainage issues and all those things that I wouldn't know about that he does. And the final, of course, site identification and land prep, et cetera, will be down the pike. We would want to use a partially pervious surface so that this would be minimal environmental impact, and adequate drainage would be at the site. Right now, the slope of the land really makes it not that much of a concern, but it has to be evaluated. There are kits that you can buy these bricks. There's a company in South Carolina that we've been looking at that could get the different colors that we're looking for. And then we'll put together the team once we get approval. So it'll be professionally installed, minimal environmental impact, and solving a number of problems as we talked about. So after years of isolation and stress due to COVID, it is now time to respond to the increased desire for outdoor activity, public gathering spaces, and opportunities for meditation and healing in these troubled times. It's time to bring this very historic concept to Roswell in a realized, tangible asset. And as we accept the generous gift of a donor to make this project happen, it's time for our new city leaders to move forward to enhance our city in this and other worthy endeavors that they've already undertaken. And this labyrinth project will take us to the next level of historical, artistic, and community heights that each of us can utilize and enjoy and be proud to have as part of our increasingly dynamic and cosmopolitan city. I was reading one story where a couple got married in a labyrinth. So each one of them walked in individually, and they got to the middle, got married, and then walked back out together. So it sort of showed how we have separate paths, and then we can join paths in a very cosmopolitan way. So Roswell being unique, we were talking about having a design contest to make the design for the center, central motif, and that could be another way to get people engaging with the city and coming up with something that would be very much well received. So we got the happiness going, we got the big picture, skies ahead, and just leave you with this lovely depiction of what we can have right there. So my ask is a commitment to a site, preferably that particular one, and oversight of the city as we move forward with the design, construction, implementation of this. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I got a lot of good questions from Councilmember Hills and Councilmember Palermo, who met with me yesterday, and Councilmember Hall and I've talked about this a good bit, and I'm happy to chat with anybody anytime as we hopefully make this happen.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation and your hard work and bringing it forward, and I'm sorry that I didn't bring it sooner after the December meeting when we had promised to move it forward in January, February.
Well, I think we all got little projects, and you just have to fit it in where you can.
So,
Yes, Councilmember Hills?
I'm having a technological problem. Dr. Price, thank you very much for bringing this back up and sticking with a passion project that clearly you have had for a long time. I expressed to you a couple of concerns of mine, questions, and I know you answered those with the best of your experience. I'm struggling with two main things with this. One, how it relates to Roswell, how a labyrinth relates to Roswell. And two, and these are not in order, how the vision of this mayor and council and what we want to do in the way of a city master plan, our parks master plan, our arts master plan, all of that overlaying. And this is not personal, just we talked about this outside yesterday, how that all plays in. And in gathering information from different entities in Roswell, the labyrinth has never come up in conversation to me, but that's not to say it hasn't been talked about, so I want to recognize that. I also have two personal experiences that I shared with you. One in a Christian, a faith women's retreat about 15 or 16 years ago, and we had a couple hundred women use the labyrinth in a church setting, in a faith-based setting, and it wasn't fulfilling. And then another secular event that I participated in that was not some kind of, I don't know, it was not a church event, and it was the same thing. And I'm struggling with connecting that and intertwining that with the vision of this mayor and council right now with a city master plan, art, and parks. Can you speak to a little bit of that for everybody that didn't share it in my conversation?
Yeah, thank you for those concerns. I mean, everybody has concerns about everything you attempt to do in the city, and sometimes things don't always appear to have a large number of people's interest, and especially in the art realm. People have very personal feelings about art that they do or don't like, and according to Alon, we've been talking about this now, and he's of course very excited. He's done it in other places, and he's very happy to be the conduit to make it happen here. And he says he looks at the world as everything is art. So I guess from one perspective you could call this art. From another perspective you could call this, a solution to a number of problems. One, we've got parking issues at Canton Street. Two, we've got the desire to get people out of doors. Three, just a beautiful design element to enhance the city. You say, what does it have to do with Roswell? Well, what does anything have to do with Roswell? We're a very unique city. We have a lot of unusual, we're not a cookie cutter. We like things that are a little out of the ordinary, a little quirky. Everybody I've talked to is just very excited about it, just thinks it's great, and would love to see it, and love to walk it, love to have a meeting there, have to listen to music there, just all those things. And the space out there, and you came out there with me yesterday, there's a huge amount of space out there. And we've had plans over the years to try to make that space do something. And when I first came on council in 2009, you couldn't even go to Canton Street. It was just completely dense woods. There was no path, nothing. So we got that slowly cleared out, and then we had a number of design challenges or design interests to make that a city green, make it this, make it that. And we spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars on trying to figure out what to do there, really to no avail. We've just decided on nothing. A lot of good ideas have come up. So I think at some point you just have to take the bull by the horns and say, okay, we'll either use this as a centerpiece, or we'll use something else as a centerpiece, or we'll work it into the plan, or whatever. And most people I've talked to say, yes, this can be very easily worked into the master plan, that this would be an element that would be very desirable, very beneficial, and something that a lot of people would enjoy for a lot of variety of reasons, why they might want to participate. So, what was your other question?
Well, let me interject while we're rolling here, if you all will humor me. You said you've got a donor, which that's fantastic news always with any kind of proposed project. yesterday I heard 45 feet in diameter. Today I'm hearing up to 80. Yesterday we were talking about fully funded, and we also talked about lighting, connectivity to the path, grading for topographical challenges there. I'm just curious if how deep that bucket of funding is. Are you secure on that?
Yes, I mean, we're probably not going to go into landscaping or lighting, but as far as the.
Oh, you mentioned lighting yesterday specifically.
Well, I mentioned it, yeah, I think it would be.
Okay, I'm just
probably desirable
clarifying.
To have some lighting, but I don't know that that's part of the commitment from the donor. We'll just have to see how much it costs, you know, if he's still got money left over, then, yeah, you know, we could work something out, but I don't know that that's, I think identified what it covers, which is the design, the labor, the materials, and the ground preparation. So, and installation. So that's what it covers, and if there's more that can be done within that constraint of the donor's pockets, then yes, we'd love to continue. And, you know, pulling together the garden club, different people to make the grounds around it look nice. We saw the path yesterday, the irises and the different plants that are there. I mean, it's gorgeous, and this could be certainly enhanced in the same fashion.
Thank you.
As far as, you had some concerns about what was your group that found it unfulfilling, I think you said?
Yeah, it was a church group, and there were some 200 of us. We didn't get it. I'm trying to put two and two together at how, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't know.
I think we should ask the donor now anyway. Mr. Palermo, how much money are you willing to commit to this? Yeah, go ahead, Michael, you want to say something. I'm going to cut you off, seriously.
You can go. I'm happy.
No, Representative Price, thank you for bringing this to us. Thank you for coming to see me in January. I love the idea and concept of a labyrinth. I think it's well worth thinking. But I think what you just said a few minutes ago is important for us. You have a new mayor and new council. And this new mayor and new council, I think, has already demonstrated some boldness in terms of things they want to do, and in terms of being very clear about the vision they want to do and executing strategies. And the piece that you're making reference to, you're exactly right. This city has failed on for 15 years plus on what to do. And as I mentioned to you, and by the way, I love your design here. I think it's very cool. I will tell you.
Credit to Michael Gould Digital Imaging.
I will tell you, I'm not ready for it. And kind of like I said in January, because we haven't had a chance to put our hands on what we want to do in terms of all of our master plan. We're in the infancy of it, Betty. And as much as I like it, to me, it would be premature for me to say, that's a go. And I think, as I mentioned, there are places in the city that I think that could use a labyrinth. But I love your design. It looks cool. It's awesome. I'm not ready for it. And I don't think the council's ready for it, because we have too many other pieces of the puzzle that we're putting together. And honestly, this is kind of it's a side of something that may affect what we're doing later on. And if we had this discussion 2 years or 3 years from now, I would say, and we hadn't done anything, I would say your point's well taken. But this council has not had an opportunity to implement and execute any of its strategies or vision for the long term for the city, including how the parking is going to connect to Canton Street. And there are so many other pieces of this particular economic pod, from the river all the way up Highway 9. There's a lot that's going to happen. This is too early for me, just for me. The council may disagree. And as I mentioned to you, Betty, I think there's several places where this could go in the city. I don't think this particular spot, we're not ready for it. That's just my 2 cents.
Councilmember Palermo.
Excellent. So as I mentioned, I think a labyrinth is really cool. I like the idea of it. I think it's something I do want to see in the city. I definitely appreciate a donor being interested in wanting to do this. I think this digital drawing looks really great and awesome. That being said, the mayor certainly has said some things that I wanted to bring up, which you know. which was basically, for everyone's awareness, the interesting thing is City Green, there were a lot of aspects that were very unpopular around total cost, moving of the war memorial, all these different aspects, in which case no City Green, ever ended up happening. The irony is there was one portion of the City Green that actually had unanimous support of council, which was just the pathway from the parking lot towards what now would be the flashing beacon. And that's something that I'd actually like staff, so Mr. Knighton, if you could have staff actually bring forward and provide to council. Basically, they provided a drawing where it showed the whole City Green, but it just had the highlighted part being just the trail, because that was the one part that was gaining consensus. And as we look at hopefully, getting the dust off that I think that type of planning is where I think we'd have the opportunity to incorporate this. And so because I see it, if we're gonna be redoing a great walkway, a place for people to either walk to Canton Street when parking at City Hall, or just walking really around here, I think it's gonna hopefully activate an area. So this is something I'm very interested in. I really like a lot, but I think I do want it to be a part of a plan and look at it closer, and that's where I'm not ready to support it in this exact location, because I do want to look at the possibility if we really improve that walkway up to really cross over Canton Street with great free public parking here, then I'd love to see this be a part of that, just at least for consideration and comparison.
All right, Councilmember Orthland.
The location here, this is drawn for, is it 40 by 40 that we're looking at? The location that we're looking at here, is this a 40 by 40 drawing?
I think that's identical to Sharp, yes, 42 feet in diameter.
My idea on this is not necessarily in this position, this place, but to put it behind Smith Plantation where the current labyrinth is situated. Put it there, improve the labyrinth that is already there. People that use the labyrinth already know that there is a labyrinth there. Have you done any research around the possibilities of it going behind Smith Plantation?
What are you talking about?
The historical home on the grounds.
He says there's a labyrinth on Smith Plantation, already existing. It's just been,
It's got, 4 tiers, it's like nothing.
yeah, but exactly, he's curious, would you be receptive to the possibility of it going
I
there?
don't think the donor would, no.
How come?
No, and the donor's not, that money's not gonna be there forever.
Yeah,
He's got other activities he'll support.
it's a fair,
If y'all don't want this, that's fine.
no, it's a fair question. Why would the donor not be interested in that spot versus this spot?
I think that they want it to be accessible and solving a number of problems, as opposed to being a destination for certain people who just maybe want to use it for therapy on a daily basis or something like that. It's a bigger way of looking at the usage and accessibility of this concept.
So I kind of followed up, like, I know one of the things, everybody here on this table has brought up, we've all walked this together individually, 2s and 3s, and everybody here has a lot of cool ideas. And the reality is we, like, every time I go out here with Peter, like, I'm looking at I love the digital drawing, but I can already see what I've heard from Peter, what I know he wants there. I know Peter has a very definitive perspective of what he wants there. And not saying that's what's going to happen. The point is, we haven't had enough time to put together the plan. And that's what I mean. I don't want to sound like we're blowing you off. We're just not ready. We're not ready to talk about this at this location.
Councilmember Hall?
Ladies first.
Thank you. I love the idea of the labyrinth, and the location may shift a bit because we've had the discussions now that we have that flashing beacon over there from East Alley, and talking about the path, as Councilmember Palermo said, to incorporated off of that path somewhere in that area. I don't know exactly where that path would run through, but I think it's a fabulous design and it's a fabulous concept, and I think it would be really well received. And part of the reason I say that is I don't know how many of you saw that wonderful piece of art that was the piece of driftwood that was on the path. It was just recently removed a couple of months ago. So that it was, the name of it was called driftwood. It was very unique, unique like a labyrinth is in its way, as this piece of art was. It was made from driftwood from all over the world by the artist. And people would stop and look at that, admire it. I'd have conversations with people about that piece of art. And I think this falls into that same category. I mean, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. I mean, some people may not have liked that piece of driftwood art, but I'm very, very supportive of this. I think it blends in beautifully with the City Hall property in the way that it's designed, and I think it would get use by folks, you know, coming and going after Alive After 5. I mean, you probably get a lot of people sitting around there having cocktails on their way back to the car, and they shouldn't be back to parking.
Staff having lunch.
Or staff having lunch. But I really like it, and I hope that somehow we can find a way to work it in with that new path in sort of this area.
Right? Yes, I'm sorry, Councilmember Vanstrom.
Yeah, Dr. Price, I now know why you've stayed married as long as you have. You have fortitude and strength. 2013 is when you started this conversation. That's impressive.
Yes, but now we have money, but the money's not going to be there forever.
I know, I was getting to that. So I am already on the record as saying I was excited to find someone coming forward with a project that had the funding. I think that's terrific. I would ask for your patience, and I already indicated that when we were in our text, that we do need to work out where that path and when that path is going to be completed. There's an urgency for it because of the construction that's going to be going on over in Canton, and I think we're all aware of that. But I think tying this into that and looking for the location that fits into that, if you have the patience for that, then I think that this is something that I would support. Does that make any sense to you? Is it acceptable?
Yes, Councilmember Palermo and I walked that other potential spot. I think, is that what you're talking about?
Somewhere in that vicinity.
Somewhere in that general area. And I guess one thing that made me a little nervous was the proximity to Smith Plantation and being just a little too close to, you know, a very authentic antebellum home and farm or plantation. And the other thing, the closer you are to the road, you know, the noisier it is, clearly. And a lot of trees there that have to come out. In this particular location, there's really only one tree that has to come out. It's pretty bare there right now. So those were my just initial responses.
I think I'm saying, sorry to interrupt you, I think I'm more concerned with the timeline. The mayor has indicated he's not yet ready for this because we're in planning stages. We're not yet aware of what we're doing in that area specifically, if anything. And Councilman Palermo suggested he'd like to see where that trail is going to go and take some time to review that. And then I think we all need to decide what, you know, you're going to move us forward in making some decisions, which is terrific. But I think, what is your timeline? I guess maybe that's a better question.
Well, not knowing what your timeline is for this master plan, which, you know, we've been, when I was on council, 2009, I mean, we just constantly were talking about it, never did anything. And it just gets frustrating after a while. You just say, are we not going to do anything? I mean, it's a beautiful space. We were out there yesterday. I mean, it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous place to behold, really, and to spend time. And there's a lot of space, and 42-foot diameter labyrinth in one spot is probably not going to affect the overall plan, frankly, and it might actually guide it and direct it to other complementary things that could go there in different temporary and permanent arts, et cetera. So I'm not sure what what our reluctance has been over the years, but we seem to have a hard time biting the bullet on this one. I'm not sure why, but, and I think partly it's because we've spent so much money and seen nothing for it, and that we're reluctant to do anything now. We're almost paralyzed. So that paralysis really needs to be shed, and we need to accept this gift and just do it, move on, and work around it. And I think in the long run, we'll be happy.
Sorry, but that didn't give me more of if 6 months, a year, what?
Timeframe, well, I mean, I'm happy to work with whoever's doing, Mr. Kidd is doing the master plan, or has been, or will be, or something. I don't know who you've got working on that, but whoever is, I'm happy to work with them and see, you know, what their plan is, and if this does or doesn't work with that. I mean,
Yeah, and your comment was, you know, the funding won't be there forever. And that's, I don't want you to lose your funding. I want you to understand that we want to consider exactly where this fits in best, and not opposed to it at all. I just want your patience if we.
This person is going to have to dispense with this money, I would say no later than a year.
And I think that's a reasonable time frame as well, because Mr. Leatherman, what they have is some high-level mock-ups of even just the potential of trying to create more activity of walkways in some of the unused space and up to that beacon. And I completely share the concern of not wanting something like this too close to Smith Plantation, but just hoping and looking at the plan, which I think we can urgently do, of just the possibility of seeing, is there a place that has the right balance and works.
But there are other considerations that money could just disappear. I mean, there's things beyond our control that could happen. So once there's a commitment, then there'll be a commitment for the funds.
Dr. Price, is this the only location, or would there be, for example, if it were part of the Roswell River Master Project, there was a spot for it, would that be a consideration for the donor?
I haven't seen anything that made sense to me, but I mean, I'm happy to look.
I just want to know if there are other possibilities of premium destination spots in the city based upon our
I think
plan.
it has to fit the bill for being in a relatively peaceful, serene, let's say tree-lined area that is accessible to a great number of people without issues of parking, issues of accessing it by foot, or, you know, all those things, to make it very, very accessible to a large number of people if they should choose to want to look at it or walk it.
Okay, thank you, Betty. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Any further questions or comments? This was a discussion item.
I really appreciate your allowing me at this late hour in the night, and thank you.
Thank you for
Councilmember
coming
Hall for
in.
doing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Okay.
for
Thank you for
bringing
your
it.
service.
All right, that is, I believe, the last item on our committee agenda. And with that, I will entertain a motion of adjournment. I'm sorry. Hold on, one sec, hold, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, it's a discussion item. Yes, motion of adjournment. Motion by Councilmember Vanstrom, second by Councilmember Morthland. Thank you so much. All those in favor? I assume so by the fact that you have stood up. So thank you. All right.